Chapter 980. The matter of Dumb Sand's future adoption came to an end. Zhang Yingying revealed a bright smile. It was as if she had erased all her worries. She ran to the edge of the formatting domain and loudly cheered Dumb Sand on. Because of the scene just now, the live broadcast viewers from all over the world seemed to be gossiping. This was nothing to Zhang Yingying and Luo Nan. Well, Luo Nan simply didn't know. His mind was completely focused on Zeolite Beach. In the following period of time, he needed to realize his own experimental designs and goals, and he also needed to accept Zhang Yingying's request. Though the tasks had increased, he did not feel that it was hard. He did not feel that it was an additional burden. This was indeed the case. In terms of super configuration, the experimental steps he was about to do did not fundamentally conflict with helping Dumb Sand's soul leave his body. The two were closely related to each other. At most, Dumb Sand, the little white mouse he had created, had the position of a biological son reserved for someone else. Another identity was added, and Dumb Sand needed to be carefully protected. He did not want to accidentally crush Dumb Sand to death. He absolutely had to remember this. Luo Nan emphasized this a few times in his mind and went to look at Dumb Sand. Unlike Zhang Yingying's purely emotional attention, what appeared in Luo Nan's eyes was never a simple individual or an ant colony. It was more like a specific character in a play he directed. Before the label of Zhang Yingying's biological son was attached, there was already an extremely concrete position. It was not just Dumb Sand. Everyone on Zeolite Beach other than Zhang Yingying was no exception. Right now, it was approximately 1 in the afternoon in D City. The flow of time seemed to be growing faster and faster. Luckily, Luo Nan could sense that the order on Zeolite Beach was in the process of accelerating its formation according to his original design. With Shinha at the center, more than 30 experiment equipment were scattered in various locations on the beach, taking up the largest area. The syncopators, which had been supplemented, were like hundreds of clamps that clamped the void and split curtain above their heads into a hole. Luo Nan knew that Shinha and the others wished to break away from all syncopators. They wanted to be able to allow the formatting domain, which was not restricted by the dynamo core, to exist normally. But unfortunately, it was basically impossible for them to reach this level. It wasn't that Luo Nan was holding back. It was just that they didn't understand what sort of environmental state this sandy terrain, which Luo Nan had single-handedly created, represented. Without personally participating in that dream, without living, fighting, and struggling in that kind of environment, they were destined to be separated by a layer of unbreakable cognitive barrier. Not to mention that the other two blocks that were in a state of confrontation were still hidden and complicated reserved spaces. Therefore, they had already trampled through many gullies and piles of sand that Luo Nan had personally dug. That was why they played the game of you run and I run with Dumb Sand. They never thought of encircling, intercepting, repelling, and annihilating Dumb Sand. Luo Nan didn't mind this at all. He also had no intention of publicizing his tense, unique, and miraculous experience to more people. There were some links that couldn't be left to others. They had to go through his own hands, and only his own hands. After making a rough estimation, he slowly walked towards the formatting domain on the beach. Everyone on the beach, as well as the live stream viewers who were staring at the beach, were still very sensitive even after 3 or 4 hours of indoctrination and torture. They suddenly became nervous. Even Zhang Yingying, who was wholeheartedly cheering for her own son, subconsciously gave Luo Nan a shot. Luo Nan took the opportunity to point at her from a distance. Be careful. Stay a bit further away. Fuck, was he going to make a big move? Luo Nan's path just so happened to pass by Hood's vicinity. This captain, who was the most powerful on the beach and had the most advanced dynamo core implanted, could not help but feel his heart twitch. Right now, Hood was already acting according to Luo Nan's arrangements. He had completely become an outstanding valve, assisting the main axis, Shinha. He adjusted the fluctuating energy of the 30 or so burners, allowing them to establish a strict and free domain in this area that wasn't all that vast. He believed that he had already done quite well. Compared to the trembling Shinha, he was already able to move freely within the formatting domain. He was able to find a few key nodes and carry out preemptive adjustments. He could even restart the mission assigned by the laboratory, sending back all sorts of monitoring and sensing data in an unending stream, assisting the other side to carry out some hidden tests remotely. But when Luo Nan walked past him, Hood could not help but be stimulated. He straightened his body to maintain the most standard and most rigid posture. Luo Nan ignored him. He just waved his hand at Zhang Yingying from a distance. Don't mind stupid sand. He's useful. This made Hood wake up from his stupor. The realization from earlier floated up in his mind once more. Everyone on the beach, including the things, were all designed by the person who just walked past. Now, it was finally time to activate it? Hold on. All sorts of distracting thoughts flashed through Hood's mind. Only now did he discover that Luo Nan had already entered. This person had long since entered the range of the formatting domain. There were no traces of the format of fire operating on his body. He was like a tourist taking a stroll on the beach, his gaze casually sweeping across various locations. He looked very little at the people, but he looked a lot at the scenery. Hood did not find it strange that Luo Nan had the ability to enter and exit as he pleased. After all, this was something that Luo Nan had single-handedly created. The 100 or so centometers that buzzed and floated above his head were the symbol of Luo Nan's strength. It was just that he was currently shouldering the heavy responsibility of monitoring Luo Nan. One of the most important tasks was to make a good record of Luo Nan's state when Luo Nan was in close contact with the formatting domain for future research. Hood subconsciously followed Luo Nan, but he felt that he was being impulsive the moment he took a step forward. Sure enough, Luo Nan stopped in front of him and turned his head to look over. Hood was extremely embarrassed. He never expected Luo Nan to nod. Come on then. There's something I need to arrange. Okay. Hood did not have the courage to refuse at all. He took 2 quick steps and followed behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan did not give him a direct order. Instead, he turned his head and walked forward. He was neither fast nor slow. Looking at the direction, it seemed that he wanted to go to the edge of the beach. There was a sports car parked there. It seemed to belong to Meng Chong of the Blood Flame Order. That fellow had been gone for a few hours. Who knew what he was up to? Weren't the two going to meet later? What was Luo Nan doing? Was he shaking people? Hood's thoughts fluctuated in his mind, but he was unable to grasp the main point. Right now, he was hoping that the special communication channel would give him clear instructions. But the other side seemed to be worried that Luo Nan would discover them. They entered a state of silence. Luo Nan walked all the way to the sports car before stopping. Hood stopped when Luo Nan stopped. Hood's eyes were sharp. He noticed that a large circle was clearly drawn on the sand beneath the sports car. It was very orderly, encircling the entire car within. No area protruded out. B. Headquarters. The first few words were a bit vague. Luo Nan stood outside the circle and pointed at the car. The beach might be a bit messy, but it might not be that messy. In any case, you guys absolutely cannot allow any shockwaves to enter this circle and harm this car. So you really want to be a demon? Go say these words to the main axis. These were Hood's first 2 thoughts. This was also the root of his arrogance. The problem was that he displayed it outwardly, so he could only nod obediently. In the end, he felt that it wasn't enough, so he repeated himself. This is the headquarters. We absolutely cannot allow any shockwaves to enter the circle and harm the sports car. Luo Nan nodded. He turned around and gazed into the distance toward the ocean. Hood copied him and turned around. From this position, he could see the entire beach. He could see everything at a glance. Hood confirmed once more that the overall layout of the beach had certainly gone through special planning. The Deep Blue Walker experimental machine, which was countless generations behind, was parked at the end of the beach. Its position just so happened to be in the direction the sports car was pointing. The two formed a central axis, dividing the beach into two halves. In addition, there were a few undulating piles of sand and gullies. They shouldn't have been randomly arranged. They were distributed in disorder, giving off a rather layered feeling. They formed an even more detailed layout structure. As for where the marvels lay, Luo Nan was unable to discern them in a short amount of time. He could only do his best to record these things and transmit them to the rear so that they could analyze and interpret them. However, the problem right now was that the originally neat layout had become exceptionally messy because of the several dozen burners. Should I go pile up sand next? Huda wasn't unhappy about this. It would be great if he could seize this opportunity to grasp a few key structures and techniques. Luo Nan didn't issue any similar orders after waiting for a while. Instead, he thought of something else and added, "Stupid sand, crossing the line won't do either." Huh? Hood was at a loss. He followed Luo Nan's line of sight and looked at stupid sand, which was still 100 meters away. With that thing's speed, it would take an hour to force its way over even if it didn't change its anchoring direction. Was this a mockery? Oh, it won't be able to crawl over in a short amount of time. However, we need to set up a boundary in front of us. Luo Nan's voice had just fallen when an incorporeal force suddenly took effect in the coastal area of the beach, about 30 meters behind the deep blue walker exoskeleton. A portion of the sand slowly caved in, revealing a gully that was 10 meters long, half a meter deep, and about the width of a palm. It was perpendicular to the central axis formed by the sports car and the exoskeleton. That area just so happened to be a relatively densely populated area. There were a few burners nearby, and they were adjusting their positions in order to adapt to the formatted domain. One of them was overly nervous when encountering such an unforeseen event. His energy was misaligned, and he suffered a backlash from the domain. Arcs of light whipped him, and the others around him suffered a calamity as a dazzling ball of light exploded. No matter what was said, Hood had a role as a valve. Even though he didn't have any direct subordinates over there, it still made him lose face. He subconsciously said, "Professor Luo, don't blame me. These cowards lack training. I didn't expect you to have a particularly high level. Time doesn't allow for it." Hood vaguely remembered that Luo Nan planned to board a ship at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and leave T-City. This meant that, bah! What the hell was I worrying about? Chapter 981. Hood was seriously dissatisfied with his family's overly weak mentality, but who cared about this at this time? Luo Nan continued to emphasize the topic related to stupid sand. That 30-meter line is your defensive position. Stupid sand cannot be allowed to pass through no matter what. Well, you guys aren't so shameful as to use direct attacks, right? How would we dare to attack the son of a dog couple? Hood straightened his back in the next second and simply responded, "Understood. Direct attacks are not allowed. Stupid sand is not allowed to cross the 30-meter line." "Then that's fine. Next, you guys can return to your positions." "Return to my positions?" Hood was stupefied. He saw Luo Nan wave his hand, and a row of condensed numbers appeared out of thin air as they approached the rear area of the sports car camp. It was similar to the blackboard writing left behind by the sea, but it was much more sparse. Then it continued to increase and expand the area of coverage. Whether it was outside the relatively stable formatted domain or within the fluctuating and turbulent domain, these illusory and fragile water vapor could always take form and mark their positions. Most importantly, these condensed numbers were clearly divided into zones. The spacing was roughly the same, and they were randomly distributed. They were like marks on a somewhat irregular chessboard. F***CK, isn't this just a sand table? Hood looked at the condensed numbers from 1 to 35. The order in which they appeared was not fixed, and there was no pattern to their positions. However, the total number just happened to be the number of burners on the beach. They were missing one. Huda blinked his eyes. He was pondering and guessing at the logic within when Luo Nan snapped his fingers beside him. They were almost completely synchronized, and a small number floated above the heads of all the burners on the beach. It ranged from 1 to 35, corresponding to everyone. They were still missing one. Hood subconsciously raised his head. His chin had just stuck up halfway when he heard Luo Nan speak. You don't have a point number. You're responsible for maneuver adjustments. Make the person number correspond to the area number. Limit the range of movement. Thank you for your trust. Thank your mother. Yes, understood. Hood responded in a loud voice. Due to Luo Nan's continuous operation, there was a bit of chaos on Zeolite Beach. Luo Nan was worthy of being the #1 user of the condensation ring aside from Her Majesty Empress Wu. His control over water vapor had reached perfection. Many people did not realize from beginning to end that the numbers above their heads had already been engraved. Using this kind of operation in the field of formatting made Hood's scalp go numb. He could not help but think to himself. Would any burner who watched the live broadcast have the courage to form a formation and fight against Luo Nan in the future? That was a little far-fetched. The direct cause of the chaos was Luo Nan's continuous construction on the beach aside from controlling the water vapor. He himself did not move, but wherever his thoughts went, the beach would rise, collapse, or be compacted, or be torn apart, divided horizontally and vertically, arbitrarily planned. It was a godly operation that would frustrate any controller of formatting domain. But the most direct impact was that Shinha and a group of military elites had their hands and feet tied. They were afraid of accidentally tripping. No, they were afraid of destroying Professor Luo's profound layout. They should be content. Soon, they wouldn't be able to move even if they wanted to. Hood's face twitched slightly. He benefited from following Luo Nan's observation perspective. Right now, he had a macroscopic concept of the layout. But it was also because of this that he was able to truly confirm that everything he saw Luo Nan do had a basis. Luo Nan's methods were strict. Everyone had a fixed position. Everything was a chessboard and chess piece that Luo Nan had planned out. One could imagine that Luo Nan certainly had a clearer, more realistic, and more concrete point of reference in his mind. But what was that point of reference? Luo Nan's gaze swept over while his thoughts were running wild. Hood was agitated, but then he suddenly realized that he should go do something. He should go organize the order on the beach to make it conform to Luo Nan's requirements. He should make everyone occupy their positions and combine with the delineated chessboard to form the situation Luo Nan needed. This job was easy to do. Everyone was basically a soldier or had a military background. Discipline and obedience were guaranteed. Luo Nan's marking was extremely clear, so there was no need to put too much effort into it. This was especially true when he saw Shinha, who was the main axis, follow Hood's orders and board the cabin with a stupefied expression. He entered the super simple and crude Deep Blue Walker experimental machine. Hood's sullen mood from the morning dissipated by half. In just a few minutes, the originally chaotic Zeolite Beach entered a relatively peaceful and silent state. All the experimental equipment with the markings above their heads stood in their positions. The formatting domain formed by several dozen people covered nearly the entire beach as a matter of course. However, it was a bit unstable right now, so much so that the floating sandball model displayed a large degree of distortion and deformation. This was Hood's responsibility, needless to say. Hood didn't dare to meet Luo Nan's eyes. He relied on his understanding of the current structure of the domain to rush to various areas of the beach. He constantly adjusted the swaying energy flow due to the position changes, ensuring the basic stability of the formatting domain. Hood couldn't help but think at the beginning of his rush. Did Luo Nan use this method to push him out of the entire system? He exerted himself, but he was unable to participate personally. But soon, Hood discovered that this wasn't the case at all. No matter what angle he looked at it from, he was more capable of challenging himself than the experimental equipment who were entrenched in a domain. He had a greater perspective on the overall situation, and he was more capable of seeing through all the visible and invisible details on the beach. So much so that after running back and forth 7 or 8 times, he wanted to immediately apply for the Apocalypse Opening Array's access test to the laboratory. I've most likely already leveled up. Later on, Hood even felt that he had developed some sort of new supernatural power. He seemed to be able to look through the formatting domain and see the deeper layers of laws and logos behind realization. The most typical thing was that he could faintly sense that the sandy beaches, gullies, piles, and groups that Luo Nan had arranged on the beach all had their own explanations. Specifically speaking, they were able to conduct some sort of channeling, separation, disturbance, and even amplification of the formatting domain. But these were just grains of sand without any processing whatsoever. Is this also the result of the legendary super configuration? A hidden signal wave suddenly interfered. It was the laboratory reopening the communication channel and giving him a clear order. Continue to observe and analyze the coupling between the structure of the beach and the domain space. Send back the results. Do you really think my brain capacity is limitless? I'm just a tiny front end. The dynamo core in my corpus callosum isn't even the size of a fingernail. How can I have enough computing power? Hood wiped his face. Unknowingly, he had already achieved the untimely achievement of being drenched in sweat by the seaside in early winter due to the consumption of large amounts of mental and physical energy. But before he could complain back, the prompts for the temporary privilege upgrade rang out in succession. Holy sh*T, the Apocalypse opening array had automatically responded and supported him. Was he enjoying the treatment of Yan Yongbo's supervisor in advance? Hood's mind was racking with calculations, but his mood was high. He put in even more effort into his work. Both sides were like this. They complemented each other. But why didn't he feel any changes after running another lap? The feeling was still fuzzy. It was still fuzzy. It could be said that there was some progress. But whether it was adjustments or analysis, he always felt that he was still floating on the same surface. He was unable to sink no matter what. During this time, the Apocalypse opening array's support privileges were upgraded once more. The dynamo core was about to enter an overclocked state. Only Yan Yongbo's superior architecture could forcefully raise the analytical ability to a higher level. The laboratory clearly had no plans to further open its privileges. Yan Yongbo was hiding in some corner of T-City. He had no intention of making a move. The situation of Hood's drenched in sweat had not been alleviated. He wiped his sweat again. In the end, he could not help but turn his head to look at the youth leaning against the hood of the sports car. There was a thought stirring in his mind. This kid. How in the world did he do it? Hood caught Luo Nan's gaze at this time. He subconsciously followed the direction and turned his head once more. This time he saw dumb sand. This monster, which they had played a game of cat and mouse with for nearly an hour, had received some unknown influence or command. It had changed its direction and was slowly crawling inland. Hold on. That's the direction of the sports car's headquarters. That's not right. Hood wiped the beads of sweat on his eyelashes. He suddenly realized that with the establishment of the beach chessboard and the gradual adjustment and stabilization of the formatting domain, the sandball model, which had barely recovered to a regular state, had automatically moved to the central axis of the beach. Its position was right in the middle of the central axis. Hood hated that he could not only consider this as a coincidence in such a situation. He felt a splitting headache if he thought about it even a little more. How could this be a coincidence? Hood rubbed his head. His eyeballs quickly moved back and forth before he caught up to dumb sand. As he continued to deepen his understanding of the layout of the beach, he was already able to see that dumb sand's conflict with the formatting domain was growing sharper and sharper by purely considering the direction and efficiency of its interference. Perhaps it had been like this before. It was just that a bunch of idiots were completely unaware of it. The laboratory had timely transmitted over a small piece of code. It was said that the code was specially optimized for observing dumb sand's form. The analysis carried out by the laboratory was certainly more profound and thorough than Hood's short-term understanding. The small results they produced were still a bit useful. As the relevant sensing mode leveled up, Hood could clearly sense that dumb sand's body was constantly crawling and flowing forward. Its body shape was constantly undergoing minute changes. Through its conflict with the formatting domain, Hood could indirectly prove that its skeletal structure and the deeper flow and operation of energy were changing much more intensely than what had appeared on the surface. According to what Luo Nan had said, its super-configuration system was constantly being improved. Was it beginning a new round of evolution? What a joke! Did he really think that there was a supercomputer and a nuclear power plant buried under the beach? Chapter 982. Whether it was Hood's logic or the results of the front-end calculations, there was an inescapable hole in both. Zhang Yingying's humanoid battery had already fallen to the point where it only knew how to shout, 666, from the outside. It clearly did not have any more input. Dumb Sand itself had a slight increase in the energy devouring of the formatting domain, but it did not have the qualifications to drive this sort of super energy-consuming optimization that required even more powerful computing power. Luo Nan was supporting it? Perhaps this was an explanation that could barely be accepted, but the problem was that Luo Nan had clearly said before that he needed to maintain objectivity and reduce the disturbance to the experimental conditions. From the looks of things, he had basically done it. There was no need to deceive himself. Unless his true experimental target was none other than this stupid and unyielding monster that only knew how to crawl forward. What live broadcast classes, what examples, they were all methods to deceive people. Hood had a sudden realization when he thought of this. He had the impulse to pick up Dumb Sand and snatch it back to the laboratory. Fortunately, he had not gone crazy to the point of disregarding everything, even though he was working hard for the Apocalypse Laboratory. Cool-headedness and rationality pushed his train of thought to continue walking a step deeper. If Luo Nan had been supporting Dumb Sand's evolution from the shadows, how did he do it? Luo Nan was without a doubt a powerful expert of the mental side. He was the one who proposed the cage theory, and he was a master of mental senses. The safest route was obviously interference on the mental plane. Hood was rather self-aware. He knew very well that compared to the energy and information structure of the material plane, the mental domain was the weakness of these people and even the entire Deep Blue platform system. Up until now, no burner had reached the level of an extraordinary, and that was a strong proof. The newly opened Apocalypse Array was much more brilliant, but its specific effects needed to be tested with time and actual combat. Therefore, Hood did not expect himself to make some great discovery in this area. He just wanted Luo Nan to have an extremely brilliant interference channel that exceeded the scope of everyone's observation. But there was one more point. Dumb Sand, this simulated life creation, was the support for its current evolutionary speed. Even if Luo Nan, where was Luo Nan's support? The enormous energy consumption was fine. He was an extraordinary. A monster of this level could not be discussed with common sense. But the resources needed for Dumb Sand's quasi-life evolution, and perhaps the extremely complex and rigorous design of Zeolite Beach. Where did this astronomical computing power come from? Although various experiences and experiments had shown that the intelligence of extraordinaries was generally much higher than that of ordinary people, their performance in memory, precise logic, and other areas that could be tested were also superhuman. But there had never been any evidence that the brain of an extraordinary could race against a supercomputer. In fact, the basic operating model of the human brain determined that in the field of processing large amounts of information and big data analysis, people had to rely on external objects. There was a statistic that stated that 5% to 8% of the world's supercomputing resources were controlled by the inner world for a long period of time and used for various cultivation experiments, model building, and analysis work. It was the same everywhere in the world. What made you, Professor Luo Nan, think that you could ignore the basic rules and seize a huge amount of computing power from nothingness and use it? Inexcusable, truly inexcusable. Hood couldn't get around the logical holes, so he naturally let his imagination run wild. He even began to suspect right now that Luo Nan was a fellow that had undergone transformation. Luo Nan had also been implanted with a dynamo core. Moreover, it was a special type, possessing a powerful computing ability that exceeded that of a normal person. Damn it. It was impossible to implant a supercomputer into Luo Nan's brain, right? But then again, if it was just a remote link. Hood turned his head to look at Luo Nan once more, but Luo Nan's gaze had already left the concrete changes on the beach. It was cast towards the boundless sea and sky. Of course, in order to see into the distance, one first had to penetrate the wall of hazy fog in front of them. It seemed like that mass of fog was also tossed about by Luo Nan. What was inside that fog? His eyebrows furrowed and relaxed. He rarely took the initiative to send a message to the command center. His wild imagination seemed to be able to make sense from a logical point of view, as well as the small stirrings he received just now. 1. Investigate the entire world's supercomputing resources. 2. Monitor the mass of fog on the sea's surface. Hood knew that if he could think of this, the group of people in the laboratory could probably think of it as well. But he was being played like a chess piece in broad daylight. He really couldn't swallow this anger if he didn't seize the opportunity to tear down the stage. It would be great if he could really find something by following the vines to the melon. But if he couldn't find anything, he couldn't just use this to confirm that Luo Nan's power and resources all came from the legendary new plane. While he was still pondering, Hood felt a slight chill on his forehead. Beads of water hit his forehead. It's raining? He subconsciously raised his head. The sunlight was hazy, but it was still there. Then this bead of water. Hood's eyelids jumped twice, and he looked back in Luo Nan's direction. Over there, Luo Nan was still gazing into the distance. Moreover, his neck was raised high, as if he was looking at the color of the sky. What's so good about a cloudy day? Is it to observe the stars? Hood cursed again. He nearly believed that the bead of water that fell on his forehead was just an illusion. But Luo Nan seemed to have sensed something in the next second. He turned his head to look over. His gaze wasn't all that sharp, but had felt the coolness of the bead of water penetrate his skull and seep into his heart. Fuck, why the hell am I arguing with this master of mental senses who invented the prison theory? Hood immediately became terrified. He lowered his head and forcefully restrained all his thoughts. He buried his head into Luo Nan's various arrangements. His mental activities were a bit richer. He could be considered useful. Luo Nan gave a brief evaluation to the fellow running back and forth on the beach. Then he collected his mind and reached out to pinch the space between his eyebrows. He made a slight adjustment, and then he raised his head to look at stupid sand crawling left and right along the central axis. Actually, Luo Nan knew that this silly fellow was one of the brightest targets on the beach. Who knew how many cameras and detectors were shooting at it through the air? How many supercomputer resources were mobilized because of it? And there were several extraordinaries around D City, including Her Majesty Empress Wu, on the even more illusory and distant mental plane. They weren't idle either. There was certainly pressure, and Luo Nan didn't want it to be like this. How could a person with his personality play in such a high-profile manner if it wasn't necessary? Time was truly tight, and resources were scarce. If Luo Nan could find an opportunity to fleece some wool, he wouldn't care about it no matter what. Luo Nan gazed quietly, carefully evaluating the sand. In a certain sense, stupid sand was a testing machine, a screening machine. People of different levels saw completely different scenes. At this stage, the entire skeleton of stupid sand still lacked stability. Old grains of sand were constantly breaking off and losing their activity, but new grains of sand were irradiated and stuck to it, adding to its structural improvement. This was the most objective observation result. The vast majority of people heard Luo Nan say this, and they thought this way. There was no mistake. If they carefully memorized it, they might gradually comprehend a deeper level of understanding in the future. However, some people could only see its headless and tailless appearance, as well as its silly reactions. Even if they listened to Luo Nan's explanation, most of them would just watch the show in the end. These people were completely uninitiated, and they weren't paying attention. They didn't care about Luo Nan, and they didn't need to expend any effort. There were also some people who more or less captured the laws of stupid sand structural adjustments based on Luo Nan's lectures. They recognized the interaction between this fellow and the external environment, and they even made some inductive inferences. Being able to reach this step meant that stupid sand already possessed the initial level of structural thinking. Hood was not bad. He was really not bad. Even though he borrowed the help of the formatting domain to indirectly map the relevant structural clues, being able to reach this step proved that he had brains and talent. This was already an effective calculation node. If there were a few more people like Hood in the live broadcast audience of the entire world, Luo Nan would have quite a bit of time to think about it. It was just that Hood still had a long way to go before he could see through stupid sand's structural state and meaning. As for extraordinaries, forget it. In any case, they were mostly useless right now, so there was no need to spend too much effort on them. In any case, in the eyes of its creator, Luo Nan, the true stupid sand was a state that was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more complicated. It wasn't just a simple creation of sand. Its complexity wasn't reflected in the tens of thousands of grains of sand that made up its skeleton. Instead, it went outwards. If one were to describe it directly, stupid sand was like an exerciser running on a beach. On its back was a huge parachute. The parachute was formless, but the pulling force was real. The dense and fine parachute ropes were gathered on every effective superconfiguration structure of stupid sand skeleton. This added an immeasurable degree of complexity to its already extremely complex body movements, and it also brought about enormous resistance. But the matter could also be looked at the other way around. The ropes that were holding dumb sand back could be said to be the puppeteer's strings of control. As for dumb sand, it was just a puppet that was being controlled. The strings of control, and the even bigger puppeteer behind them were the core of all the activities. Zhang Yingying could accept the first description with some difficulty. But Luo Nan knew that it was also an inappropriate description. The second description was closer to the truth. But regardless of whether it was stupid sand pulling the parachute ropes or the strings of control controlling stupid sand, there really was a big fellow behind these invisible ropes. It was a colossus that was far more complex than stupid sand's living system by millions and millions of times. The invisible ropes pierced through the void and cast towards the thick and rolling sea surface. They hooked and pulled, interacting with the main body of the hazy fog at a high frequency. Right now, rotors would occasionally break through the smoke barrier at the edges of the enormous fog on the sea surface, probing in and out. In the deeper regions, there were even more concealed triamphibious detectors that continuously operated above and below the water, taking samples. Many people were paying special attention to the fog. They had already walked far ahead of Hood. They were just ordinary machines. They could at most disturb the semi-incorporeal aerosol structure in the air and disturb the distribution of a small portion of the water droplets. They lacked the ability to sense and interfere with the more complex level of the superconfiguration that connected the structure. Even though the enormous superconfiguration system hidden in the mist was far from taking shape. Luo Nan really wanted to call it a magneto-optical mica, but he really didn't have the face to describe it this way. Let's just call it mica. Chapter 983. This creation could barely be called the predecessor of the magneto-optical mica jellyfish. Luo Nan had started from the theory of the school of fantasy. He had referred to the database of fantasy mimicry configuration techniques and slowly pieced them together to create it. The school of fantasy was not just named because of fantasy configurations. It was also because this school had done extremely deep research into fantasy breeds. They had even formed a complete and grand system from this. But in the end, they were unable to resist the environment polluted by sin poison, and so they ultimately declined. High-profile existences like the magneto-optical mica jellyfish were certainly their research targets. Although they did not truly dissect and restore this legendary configuration creation invented by an inconceivably powerful existence, they did develop a few fragmented imitation works. These were all classic works that had stood the test of time. These configuration works were completely worthless under the environment polluted by sin poison. But Luo Nan was not in the light concealment galaxy. He was on Earth right now, so there were basically no taboos. Luo Nan had the legacy of these predecessors and the relatively clear memory modules that were deeply rooted in the palace of his own mental domain. Only then was Luo Nan able to smoothly cut into it, But no matter how much of a foundation he had and how much of a path he had to abide by basic laws in order to simulate and create a powerful fantasy breed. He still needed to realize the continuous leap from the material plane to the life plane to the fantasy plane. It was impossible to accomplish everything in one step. According to Luo Nan's own observations and the research results of the School of Fantasy, he could only create a magneto-optical mica jellyfish with clouds as the foundation of the material plane. This was good luck for Luo Nan. He had learned the condensation ring from Her Majesty Empress Wu. It was simply a match made in heaven. However, the relevant configurations were too high-end as he went down. It was impossible for Lieutenant Goyi to clearly explain every step of the fantasy mimicry technique. There were too many missing thumb links. He needed to be like stupid sand and undergo large-scale, rapid iterative experiments and screening. In comparison, stupid sand's paltry 33 generations of artificial choices couldn't even be considered a formality. In fact, stupid sand's lifelike super configuration system was something Luo Nan had extracted from the database of the fantasy mimicry technique. A considerable portion of it was based on the servant army of the magneto-optical mica jellyfish. These demons and monsters were all subdued and even pieced together by the magneto-optical mica jellyfish's soul magnetization power. To a certain extent, his greatest enemy was the Heavenly Yuan Empire's army. Naturally, he had the ability to counter the Standard Formation, the Jade Crystal Formation, and other key means of battle. During the relay station period, those assault beetles and acid pterosaurs were able to forcefully break through the outer perimeter. They did not rely solely on the Hellfire Tyrant's power. It was because of Luo Nan's simulation, reference, and even direct use of this series of designs that Dumb Sand, who had yet to fully mature, was able to possess a certain level of penetration toward standard arrays, in other words, the domain of formatting. Right now, Luo Nan was indeed using stupid sand as a parameter to refine the battlefield situation on the sand table. He substituted characters like the assault beetle and the acid pterosaur. Speaking of which, even if it was a minor character, like Dumb Sand, there were plenty of examples that could be used as reference. Coupled with the clear direction of artificial selection, the inheritance and optimization of the relevant configuration logic could be sped up. All sorts of favorable conditions were stacked together. Due to the limitations of the innate non-life matrix, it would take hundreds or even thousands of generations for the magical probability to take effect and form a lifelike creation like Dumb Sand. It was definitely not something that could be completed in a short hour, let alone the rapid self-evolution after taking shape. The reason why he only used the 33rd generation was because the core driving force, the most essential cheating machine, was this coarse lump of mica on the surface of the sea. Luo Nan had spent 12 hours from the wee hours of the morning until now. What he had truly spent his energy on was this similar experiment established on the water molecular matrix. Mica had already started from a higher starting point, with greater strides, and with a higher frequency. It had undergone several thousand generational changes, and only then was it able to obtain a small accomplishment. The configuration experiment of mica was undoubtedly the part that Luo Nan had spent the most effort on. However, in a certain sense, it was not as solid as Dumb Sand. Dumb Sand had a ready-made matrix configuration that could be used. Though it was not a true life matrix, it was a classic structure that had been tempered thousands of times. As for mica, Luo Nan was still learning as he used it. He was in a complete simulation state of making wild guesses. From the material plane, to the life plane, to the fantasy plane, there were large amounts of temporary deductions. It was constantly in turmoil and change. Its foundation was far from being stable. In any case, mica's progress was very great. The control lines on Dumb Sand's body were already quite dense. When Dumb Sand first took form, the density of the control lines cast by mica was 1,000 times higher in order to realize the interaction between the two. Practically every grain of sand had an attachment. These incorporeal ropes were used as a medium to realize the close connection and interaction between the super configurations of the two. This helped Dumb Sand to self-adjust and evolve at an abnormal speed. In this system, the dominant side was certainly mica. However, mica was far from being able to be like its ultimate reference object. Micah could not use the terrifying might of soul magnetization to control the will of higher life forms. Micah could not forcefully knead together all sorts of configurations in large quantities and give it the experience of being akin to life. The current complicated control lines were just embryonic forms. They were excessively crude embryonic forms. Of course, the next step was optimization. Luo Nan had been working on this all this time. The greatly reduced control line meant that the optimization work was fruitful. However, as long as the optimization continued, energy consumption and computing power resources were all placed before Luo Nan's eyes. They were problems that needed to be solved. They could not be avoided. Especially the latter. Luo Nan discovered this as well. He had come into contact with the two schools of the Heavenly Yuan Empire at the relay station. He originally believed that the school of creation was extremely harsh on the rigid foundation of configuration thinking and the foundation of creation. It was extremely difficult to get started, and it was hard to get close to them. But now it seemed that the school of fantasy was a bit more flexible and open on the hard foundation of individuals. However, from practical operations, the accumulation required for this school to research and push projects was far harsher than that of the school of creation. This was because it required the accumulation of an enormous amount of information and data accumulated over the endless years. It also required high-quality models and powerful computing resources to organize and utilize these materials. It even required the spirituality and intuition of a genius. Only Luo Nan had the external neuron and its database. He also had the flood of information that was forcefully shoved into him by Sunwell Hell. This enormous amount of data was immeasurably large, and it catalyzed the performance of the Immerse simulator. After experiencing a mystical dream in the simulator, all of these elements, including the memories contaminated by that damned sinful poison, went through a rough reorganization. The heavily chained crow and the wraith sign formed an imitation structure of Sunwell Hell. It formed a continuous resistance against the destructive power of the sinful poison contamination. In the end, it evolved into a boundless dense fog that pervaded Luo Nan's mental plane. Of course, there was also the article by the Lord of Deep Harmony. It was precisely the mystical power of the treatise, configuration, faith, and the great limit, a rational reconstruction of the evolution of history from ignorance to dawn, the magneto-optic Micah chapter, that reconstructed a portion of the dense fog on Luo Nan's mental plane. It combined with the lamination interference technique to materialize into a grand temple. It integrated a large amount of disordered information, turning it into a concrete and precise mold that was either complete or incomplete within the temple. These things were complicated to say, but they could be described in a simple sentence. All of the above were combined together to form Luo Nan's unique information processing model. Disregarding the efficiency of this model, it seemed to be a big eater. Its capacity was astonishing, its digestive capabilities were strong, and its processing of information was quite meticulous. In the end, it could form a concrete and precise mold. It was extremely suitable for the needs of configuration design. Luo Nan could accept this information processing model. For the time being, he couldn't think of any other model that would be more suitable for him than this one. But under the current circumstances, the priority of fine processing had to give way to work speed and efficiency. The high seas auction was about to be held. Various powers were eyeing him covetously, driven by the enormous benefits of the new plane. Even though Her Majesty Empress Wu had promised to do a good job in diplomacy for him, placing all of his hopes on someone else was not the right thing to do. Luo Nan still hoped to make solid preparations. His new plane simulation plan was a bit overly whimsical under the premise of protecting the cloud world. But if he didn't do it, who knew if he would succeed? If he didn't grit his teeth and accelerate, who knew how fast he could run in the end? And if he wanted to be fast, he needed to return to the checkpoint that he could not bypass. Energy and computing power. While Hood and the others were left speechless by Luo Nan's method of plundering resources from nothingness, Luo Nan was completely unaware that Luo Nan was having a splitting headache over how to create something from nothingness. Energy was fine. Luo Nan's core advantage had always been his soul strength resources that were rapidly expanding until they overflowed. Even though Sin Poison had dealt him a fierce blow, the basic framework was still there. If he carefully calculated, the income of the large production line would still exceed the expenditure. The most crucial thing was computing power. The processing of large amounts of information was something that defied the structure of the human brain. A few months ago, Luo Nan would probably have to go bankrupt and rent the computing space of the psychic wave network to deal with related problems. But now, he still had a path to take. More accurately speaking, he had to clean up the mess. Luo Nan gazed at dumb sand. He gazed at Mother Micah. What unfolded before his eyes was a dusky void with a deep moon and sparse stars. The vast majority of the stars were hidden behind thin clouds and mist. Only a few bright stars were distributed under the boundless curtain of the sky. Or it could be said that this was a spider web that was intermittently intertwined in the dark night. It had been torn to pieces by a certain reckless fellow. Even though it had begun to spit out silk and intertwine again, all that could be seen were a few broken lines of latitude and longitude. Luo Nan let out a long sigh. The living starry sky. The soul cloak. The altar spider web. And sin. Bah! That damned sin poison contamination. It had turned everything he had accumulated since his debut into ruins in an instant. More than 90% of the nodes of the large-scale brain array of cloud lifeforms that he had established within his sea of consciousness had instantly vanished. Even though the soul cloak had begun to gradually recover and the spider web in the living starry sky had begun to weave anew, it was still far from its peak state. Luo Nan had to use his brain quite a bit to clean up this mess. Chapter 984. Why was Luo Nan giving a live lecture? Perhaps he didn't think that much at first, but halfway through, his goal wasn't that simple anymore. On one hand, Luo Nan worked hard to restore the soul cloak, to reconstruct the living starry sky, to mend the altar's spiderweb, and to reconnect the computing nodes that were distributed all over the world. On the other hand, his public lecture this time was tantamount to carrying out a complete update to the computing nodes of the entire world. It left behind a distinct imprint of super-configurations and fantasy configurations in the minds of tens of thousands of ability users all over the world. Perhaps only 1 out of 1,000 would be able to learn and understand these concepts, but as long as this imprint existed, this vague train of thought existed. It was tantamount to realizing a system update, possessing the corresponding computing capabilities. The continuously restored soul cloak could stir the sea of consciousness, linking and penetrating these nodes, mobilizing the mental waves of these people. This allowed the biological brain computing array that existed within the nothingness to activate and carry out continuous deep-level deductions and calculations. Phew. Things seemed to have turned bad. It wasn't the situation. It was the hearts of people. Luo Nan let out a long breath, wanting to spit out those useless disturbances. But in reality, under the pressure of processing an enormous amount of information, these disturbances in his mood were just the occasional undulating wave. They suddenly faded away without a trace. Though Luo Nan was endlessly piling up and remodeling his computing resources, it was not enough to meet the urgent requirements. Just relying on the restoration of the biological brain computing array in the cloud was far from being able to quickly follow up. It was unknown how long it would take to forcefully push forward. Therefore, Luo Nan's set of 5 blocks were connected and nested with each other. The big idea of mutual reference could not be changed. Big data was like this. The initial complexity, the collection of all conditions and parameters, all for the sake of the final precision and simplification. Right now, Luo Nan had already done everything he could do. He could only depend on whether or not these people were willing to give it their all in the end. He confirmed the time once more. Perhaps his actions carried some sort of urging intent, but the atmosphere on the beach grew more and more solemn. Occasionally, light arcs caused by errors would shuttle through the atmosphere and cleave down. Huda sprinted among them, growing more and more urgent. His voice grew louder as he loudly berated the guardians of each block, including the frontmost one, Shinha, who had already boarded the cabin. This fellow was indeed more suited to be the captain than anyone else. The position Luo Nan chose for him was quite appropriate. It could be confirmed that this fellow, who was extremely rich in mental activity, was truly immersed. As for the others, whether they were driven by him or cooperated with him, they basically did their best. Under these circumstances, a bit of instability and errors were mostly problems beyond the limits of their abilities. Luo Nan could only consider adding a set and a half of centometers later to carry out control. There was also the blood flame order. Oh, here it comes. Luo Nan tilted his head and saw Meng Chong's figure appear on the jetty leading to the manor. Meng Chong walked over step by step. This number one expert of the blood flame order's fleshly side didn't pull out a team that could compare to the burners on the beach. He was alone and walked slowly. At first glance, it was practically suspicious of his attitude. However, Luo Nan was able to clearly sense that there was clearly a bubbling mouth of lava that was about to leap out from the body of this person who was slowly walking over. Or perhaps it was better to say that behind this person's swaying and restless aura, there existed clearly in the region of interference between the material and the mental. It was to the extent that the surrounding air was distorted somewhat abnormally. Luo Nan raised his eyebrows. What he saw in this moment was not just Meng Chong. Instead, behind Meng Chong's forcefully suppressed and extremely boiling aura, Meng Chong's body was not complete, but it already possessed what Luo Nan needed. It was a deformed framework of super explosive strength and destructive power. As for why Meng Chong was able to reach this point, Luo Nan could guess. It was most likely because the blood flame order had stirred the lowest layer of the lava lake structure of the blood soul temple of the abyss region with all their strength. This caused the solidified configuration of the abyss region to become somewhat unstable. It had to be said that this was a very extreme yet ingenious idea. Was Mrs. Halder using this method to express the resolute attitude of the order? Or was it to turn the order into a tool on a new level? These distracting thoughts were quickly annihilated. Meng Chong's pace was slow, but it didn't take long for him to reach Luo Nan's side. He just bowed and didn't say much. He just walked forward, wanting to cross the beach region and return to his position. Luo Nan opened his mouth to stop him. Hold on. Meng Chong subconsciously stopped, but his entire body swayed a bit too much. He turned his head in astonishment, and the corner of his eyes split open. Blood spurted out, and a small portion of it instantly dried up and hardened on his face. Meng Chong was completely unaware of it. His current body temperature was certainly very high. Perhaps it exceeded 50 degrees, 60 degrees, or even higher in some areas. It had already far exceeded the physiological limits of a normal warm-blooded animal. His entire physiological system entered a state of high consumption and combustion. In a certain sense, Meng Chong was even more suitable to be called a burner than the people on the beach. Not to mention Luo Nan, even Hood, who was on the beach, discovered the abnormality. He hesitated for a moment before taking the initiative to walk back to observe. Luo Nan didn't care about Hood. He just shook his head at Meng Chong. The price is a bit too high. This capable expert was truly loyal and devoted to the blood flame order, or rather, to Madame Halder. This extreme method caused the blood soul temple of the abyss region to become excessively turbulent. Meng Chong, who bore the framework of this turbulence, was bound to make great sacrifices. Meng Chong had a train of thought but lacked skill. The application structure was excessively crude, and the internal optimization was tantamount to nothing. All sorts of elements were gathered together to act as the final bearer. It was fortunate that Meng Chong had once passed the trial of the blood flame will. He possessed a certain level of resistance toward this type of extreme power. Only then was he able to walk to Luo Nan alive. Looking at it from another angle, why was it Meng Chong? This was because of the high-level members of the blood flame order in D City. The only one who could withstand the extreme power of the blood soul temple of the abyss region and not die was Meng Chong. Therefore, it was still Meng Chong who came. As for whether or not Meng Chong could survive until the end of the experiment, it all depended on the will of the heavens. This was no longer a help. This was a kind of sacrifice. Meng Chong didn't need to say anything. Mrs. Halder, Lo, and the others also maintained their silence. But their attitude was self-evident. This showed more weight than Lo rushing to Ban City to be a personal secretary. Even Mrs. Halder's disregard for her life to attack Gong Chi was a bit lacking due to the implications of benefits. No matter how slow Luo Nan was, he still received the message. In the end, he wasn't someone with a heart of stone. When faced with this sort of situation, even though he knew that the other side was waiting for his judgment, he didn't want to just watch Meng Chong throw away his life. In this world, people like Meng Chong were about to go extinct. Hood walked over at this time. He looked at Meng Chong with amazement. Hood had crossed paths with Meng Chong 2 days ago because of that unlucky bastard Cadman. Hood knew that the fleshly body of this blood flame order was a tough nut to crack. But it was strange. This bro was fine just now. He looked like he wanted to fight them. How did he turn into a human bomb that could explode at any time in the blink of an eye? This bro. If he wanted to fight against them, don't just take a deep breath. Just let out a fleshly firework. This was a live broadcast to the entire world. Luo Nan shot a glance at Hood. This fellow's rich mental activity was not detailed, but Hood was like a buzzing housefly. It was very annoying. Because Hood was an outsider, Luo Nan thought for a moment. He didn't directly tell Meng Chong things like, if you want to live, then do this and that. Instead, he told Meng Chong one thing. The aura on your body is too intense right now. If you directly go over, the beach will most likely turn into chaos. That makes sense. Hood fiercely nodded in agreement. Meng Chong slightly adjusted his aura. He turned his gaze to the side and roughly observed. He nodded slightly and spoke softly, then I'll go around. His voice was very low and weak, but there was an abnormal reverberation to it. It showed the unstable state of the fleshly body. Luo Nan didn't listen carefully. He simply interrupted, just fly over. I'll give you a hand. He didn't wait for Meng Chong to come back to his senses as he spoke. He simply extended a hand and pressed down on Meng Chong's shoulder. Hood's eyes went perfectly round from the side. He wanted to see how Luo Nan would act. At least 100 meters. Luo Nan spoke before he could finish his thought, go. There were no sound or light effects. In fact, Luo Nan didn't do anything at all. It was just that the Wraith sign, who was earnestly playing the role of Sun Will Hell with the heavily chained crow, responded to Luo Nan's thoughts. Its ugly face turned, and its 6 heterochromatic pupils shot out demonic light. The light penetrated the boundary between the mental and the material to circle around Meng Chong's body. The other Blood Soul Temple, which once belonged to the sacrificial tool mold of the Blood Flame Order, was subdued within the Wraith Sign's body. It instantly resonated with Meng Chong. An array of bloody light that was hard for others to see was cast down. It went straight for Meng Chong's head. With Luo Nan's control over the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District, the two sides wouldn't be in any conflict. This misty and strange power cut in like plucking a bowstring, like beating a drum. It caused Meng Chong's limbs and bones to buzz and tremble. It also caused the energy of his entire body to go out of control, and he suddenly burst forth. Meng Chong himself was still in a state of dizziness and shock. He was completely unaware that the power that had gone out of control had already spread out of his body. It formed a circle of bloody red flame light that was visible to the naked eye. The light rippled and circulated, dazzling with radiance. Even someone like Hood, who had gone through professional training, subconsciously narrowed his eyes when the intense light pierced him. The sound of the wind whistled in the blur before his eyes, and a wave of heat assaulted his face. Hood Gang instinctively made a defensive action, but he already felt something was wrong. When he focused his eyes and looked again, Meng Chong's figure was already nowhere to be seen in the area of the sports car camp. Hood was startled. He turned his head to chase after Meng Chong, but he saw a bloody light fly down from the beach directly across from the sports car camp. It landed right in front of the exoskeleton of the deep blue walker that had stood there for a long time. In the blink of an eye, the bloody light turned solid, revealing Meng Chong's somewhat swaying figure. He stood in the position he should have been standing. However, the bloody light that expanded outwards didn't ease up just because Meng Chong had arrived at his destination. Meng Chong was still searching for the feeling of balance after flying through the air. It looked like he didn't notice at all that the bloody light of flames swayed outside of his slightly swaying body. From time to time, there would be flame tails and jets that flew outwards, forcefully twisting and curling around without dissipating. These distorted flames and the ripples in the air that were being roasted by the high temperature were like a freehand artist casually splashing ink. After a few sweeps, they seemed to draw out a malevolent silhouette of nothingness. At first glance, the lower half of the silhouette seemed to be embedded into Meng Chong's waist. The other half was roaring soundlessly under the illumination of the flames. It struggled and tore. It seemed as if it could break free from Meng Chong's body at any time and wreak havoc on the world. Chapter 985. That fellow. Hood's right eyelid twitched violently. In an instant, he felt as if he had returned to the scene of the most unbearable mission from 2 days ago. Although it was mainly a remote image at that time, separated by half the Pacific Ocean, the result of him being so close to Cadman at that time was that the smell of burning flesh and lava still lingered in front of his nose. He is allergic. Damn it, you guys really didn't try to hide it at all? Not too far away, Luo Nan was stroking his chin as he evaluated. It's an unexpected fit. It doesn't seem to be an influence from later on, but the effect is quite good. Hood hoped that he could understand, but he didn't dare to. In fact, he really didn't understand. He just felt that the scene had once again exceeded the scope of his expectations. There was a bit of a commotion on the beach, probably because of Meng Chong's super flashy entrance. Luo Nan frowned, and his gaze quickly turned over. Without further ado, Hood stood at attention again. I'll go and suppress them immediately. As he spoke, he fled as if he was fleeing from a calamity. Luo Nan's eyebrows didn't unlock. It wasn't just the burners on the beach that were in turmoil. In his previous lectures, he had talked a lot about the theory of superconfigurations and demonstrated experiments. This could only be considered a one-man show. For the vast majority of people, and even for some of the extraordinaries watching from the side, there was no room for them to ponder over it. All they had to do was follow his train of thought. Regardless of the format, everyone obediently watched the live broadcast. The problem was that aside from the Wraith sign, the source of Luo Nan's effect on Meng Chong, it would be hard for anyone else to match up to him. A considerable portion of the other functions had already been revealed, the specific interferences between body and soul, as well as the ready-made and familiar rule framework. It was truly someone's cup of tea. Moreover, in terms of visual effects, it was full marks for stimulation. Luo Nan squinted his eyes. If the demonic outline 100 meters away were to be brightened up and give it a bit more texture, then it would be the mushed-mouth ape without a doubt. Didn't you see who did his bitter and hateful face? The Wraith sign's actions were a little deceptive. Luo Nan didn't care. It was just that the Blood Flame Order was bound to Mr. Mo before this. It was one thing, but if they were to be directly linked to the new plane, then they would have a headache in the future. Troublesome. Luo Nan grumbled in a low voice. He wasn't talking about future troubles. Instead, he was talking about the extraordinary level probing power drifting in the periphery. It was not easy for them to discover something that was both familiar and sensitive. They were too excited, and they gathered too close to the beach, especially to Meng Chong's side, which destroyed their original tacit understanding, if there was any tacit understanding at all. Such an action had already caused substantial interference to Luo Nan's experimental progress. During the days of fierce battles at the relay station, with the Sin Poison keeping watch, when had there ever been any interference from the mental plane? There was also Meng Chong's side. The frequent focus of the probing power would definitely affect his already unstable state. If he was not careful, he would really become a bloody firework. Luo Nan originally wanted to make a few more adjustments to stabilize the state of all parties. But now that the situation was like this, Luo Nan didn't think about it any further. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. At this time on the beach, Hudi Gang kicked the butts of 2 startled fellows in the back row. He displayed his reprimand by shouting a few times. Then he turned his head to the side and stole a glance at Luo Nan's expression. Of course, there were no valuable details. But he didn't dare to relax. He raised his voice even higher. Which part? Coastal defense? You're a proper soldier, yet you have the face to mention it. The blood vessels in the forehead of a certain second lieutenant of D City's coastal defense army, who had been yelled at by Hu Digang, nearly exploded. But a mistake was a mistake. Hu Digang helped him sort it out step by step. He forcefully swallowed his temper. Actually, Hu Digang knew that this fellow had the face of a pirate, but he was still making a big fuss. This fellow even stole Hu Digang's lead before. Hu Digang was doing this on purpose. He was able to obtain a bit of pleasure from the other's reaction in order to mend his wounded heart. Hu Digang was happy. He was just about to move on to his next target when the energy structure on this side clearly became chaotic. He flew into a rage and kicked over, causing Wilson to stagger. What the hell are you doing? Wilson didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He didn't even cast his gaze at Hu Digang. Instead, he looked over Hu Digang's shoulder and cast his gaze at an area even further away. Hu Digang's heart trembled, and he suddenly turned his head. He didn't find his target on his first try. His first impression was the strongest. He thought that Meng Chong, who was at the forefront, had sent out a demonic moth. He discovered that this wasn't the case and shifted his gaze. Only then did he lock onto the correct target. Sandball. The sandball that was floating in the center of the central axis, acting as a ruler, escaped from everyone's control. It began to float upwards until it reached a height of around 10 meters. It was like a dim star that replaced the sun that was mostly obscured by the fog. It hung above the beach and above everyone's heads, silently rotating. All of the syncopators seemed to revolve around it as well. Of course, this also included the complicated flow of energy and information connected to it, as well as the entire structure of the formatting domain. On the beach, the burners who were directly involved felt the most. In their days, the sandball was like a deep demonic eye. It gazed down and imprinted an ice-cold pressure on everyone's hearts. The sandball didn't have any pupils, but the complicated and constantly changing patterns on its surface seemed to be able to form a similar pattern at any time, rotating and flowing. Who knew where it was facing? At this moment, no one made a sound. The entire beach was silent. As the only outsider in this area, Zhang Yingying was already having a hard time with the continuous changes. She subconsciously sucked in a breath of air, and a chill ran down her spine. The beach where her biological son was located had inexplicably become extremely unfamiliar. How could she not know that the situation had now entered a critical juncture? But what should she do next? Just as she was in a dilemma, she heard the sound of an engine. The motorboat that she had piloted to charge onto the beach had drifted back to the coastal area at some unknown time. It started inexplicably and emitted a low noise. How could she not know what was going on? She clenched her teeth and brandished her fists at her biological son, who was crawling with his head lowered. She didn't say anything more. She stepped on the seawater, flipped over, and boarded the motorboat. She sped along the coastline and circled far away. As for the live broadcast, who cared about it? Just as Zhang Yingying sped along the coastline, the gray fog on the surface of the sea seemed to receive a new wave of sea wind. It began to slowly surge upwards, and its front end nearly crushed the edge of the beach. In the next second, Meng Chong, who was standing in front of the Deep Blue Walker experimental machine due to the extremely eye-catching effects of the dazzling light and shadow, suddenly shrunk his swaying body. A low, hoarse roar was squeezed out of his throat. Bloody flames soared, and the incorporeal image within seemed to want to tear apart Meng Chong's spine as it struggled to jump out. Meng Chong's body made a corresponding response. It clearly swelled up by a large circle, like a cage that grew with the wind. It forcefully imprisoned the demonic image. But looking at it from another angle, who would dare say that this wasn't an even deeper fusion? The abnormal swelling and deformation of his muscles and bones caused Meng Chong to be unable to maintain his balance any longer. His body fiercely leaned forward. Since the Deep Blue Walker experimental machine was close at hand, he naturally extended his hand and pressed down on its ice-cold outer armor. He cut a very sorry figure. The problem was that Shinha, who had been confused by a series of obvious and obscure unforeseen events within the cockpit, nearly let out a blood-curdling shriek in this instant. The manic heat penetrated through the thin outer armor, which wasn't up to wartime standards, with a rumble. In that instant, it was as if the cockpit had been flooded by a terrifying molten iron. His body and soul felt as if they were about to turn to ashes in the blink of an eye. Shinha didn't even need to react in his brain. The Deep Blue platform's self-protection mechanism had already displayed its effect. The format of fire and even the format domain automatically triggered a counterattack mechanism. A dazzling white light burst forth from within and without the metal exoskeleton. Scarlet flames and white light clashed in an instant. After a short struggle, neither side was able to do anything to the other. They sank and erupted. In the blink of an eye, the area of the beach where the two stood exploded with a rumble. Light shot into the sky. The enormous amount of water vapor that Luo Nan had left behind at the front of the beach was completely annihilated the moment the two sides clashed. The powerful shockwave wouldn't slow down because of this tiny obstacle. Instead, it rapidly spread out with an even more intense momentum under the powerful pressure of the second wave of colliding forces. Holy crap! What's going on? The shockwave from the front of the beach struck over, setting off a low-intensity sandstorm. Only now did Hood, whose face was covered in sand, truly understand the meaning behind some of Luo Nan's previous words. For example, the beach will be a bit messy in a bit. For example, we absolutely can't let any shockwave enter this circle and damage the sports car. He turned his head to look at Luo Nan. Within the sandstorm that filled the sky, Luo Nan's face became exceptionally blurry. It was impossible to see what sort of calculations Luo Nan was making. I knew this bro was going to cause trouble, but this is the situation from the start. Are you sure you can control the situation in the end? Maybe you really can control it. This was because Hood saw it. Although the words on the front of the beach were annihilated in the first instance, the words were also condensed from weak water vapor. They were distributed in various areas, and the numbers on top of everyone's heads. The words were actually clear and distinct within the sandstorm raised by the shockwave. This was too much. Hood didn't know why a good experiment, a live broadcast, had suddenly turned into this. Could this be the result of Luo Nan's experiment? What in the world was he trying to deduce with this sand table? Hood couldn't help but turn his head once more. Unfortunately, he was destined to be unable to substitute himself in Luo Nan's point of view. He couldn't see the truth that existed in another dimension. Luo Nan leaned against the sports car. He faced the sweeping sandstorm and narrowed his eyes. From his perspective, everything before his eyes appeared excessively simple and crude compared to his memories. Some of it even reached the point of absurdity and ridicule. But so what? Countless specious configurations joined together, collided, tore, and shattered as they struggled to reconstruct and reappear. Gradually, the appearance of his memories was restored. Before his eyes was clearly the awe-inspiring pass of the base. It was the surging and raging flames. It was the slave army that swarmed and pounced. It was the towering mountain of clouds that transcended his perception, yet it could topple down at any time. Chapter 986. When Zhang Yingying circled around the dangerous coastline, she threw away the jet ski and arrived by Luo Nan's side while gasping for breath. Zeolite Beach, the somewhat famous high-class private resort beach in T-City, had already changed beyond recognition. In the forefront region, Shinha piloted the Deep Blue Walker experimental machine and Meng Chong, who was practically burning from head to toe. Both sides were warrior types, especially Meng Chong. He could be considered a powerful fleshly expert. But right now, they didn't display any exquisite combat techniques. They just collided with each other in the most primitive way. Even so, violent energy erupted from them, shaking the beach. Sand and stones flew everywhere, blotting out the sky. And on Zhang Yingying's side, especially when she looked at the beach from Luo Nan's position, she couldn't help but have a similar feeling to a certain someone before. This was basically a chess sandbox, or a chess game. Everyone on the beach was like a chess board. There was no subjective initiative. Luo Nan just set up the formation, and everyone occupied their positions. They tapped and moved, released a move, and calculated the ball. Luo Nan seemed to be pondering his next move. He didn't make any moves. Zhang Yingying didn't have time to think too much. She didn't come all the way here to watch the show. She had received a message from Her Majesty Empress Wu. She had come to deliver a message. The boss is afraid of disturbing you, so she told me to tell you. Most of the others are tactful. She will help you keep an eye on things. Take control of the situation yourself. Don't be too hasty. Don't let certain people lead the tempo. Certain people? Luo Nan had a general idea of the fluctuating threads of telepathy in the Abyss region, but he really didn't know the specifics. Well, some are fine, but some are restless. Halfway through her words, she stuck out her tongue. It was unknown if Her Majesty Empress Wu was warning her from afar, but she didn't continue speaking. But she couldn't hold it in for a few seconds. She still actively hinted. It's just a few of the diamond type. Diamond? Luo Nan understood quite well at first, but Zhang Yingying's words confused him. You're behind the times. Forget it. I'll talk about it later. Don't get distracted. Luo Nan didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly. It had to be said that he had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. Compared to the time in Xia City, the heavyweight audience members were quite polite today. Or could it be that Luo Nan had basically reached the point of not being surprised by this level? Her Majesty Empress Wu's reminder was timely, and Luo Nan's control was spot on. Most importantly, the sand table, which had been continuously remodeled, and the chess pieces, which had been trained for several hours, gradually possessed the embryonic form of a three-way confrontation he needed. Luo Nan was pursuing a relatively sealed temporal structure. Once the basic form was right, the spatial distortion and sealing effect would naturally appear. It had a certain shielding effect on those curious or ill-intentioned prying eyes. Now that the cage theory was trending, forcible spying and contact on the mental level could be described as sexual harassment, which had a considerable theoretical basis. A similar thought flashed through his mind, but he quickly suppressed it. Luo Nan continued to watch the sand table in front of him. While most people were still attracted by the wrestling on the beach, they did not know that the real main body of the confrontation was the invisible domain structure on the beach and the fog on the ocean that had begun to roll and disperse. Meng Chong represented the Hellfire Tyrant type of attack power. Though it was a bit specious, it still completed the oppressive task quite well at this stage. It was like a heavy hammer, smashing the originally loose domain structure into a deformed state. It was more tenacious than before. So much so that the people on the beach finally had a bit of the posture of the bloodshed land. Luo Nan took advantage of this and used the syncopator to glue them together. He used a portion of his fantasy mimicry configuration to make them more and more in line with the basic form of a relay station in his dream. As for the mica mother constructed by the sea fog on the outside, it was undoubtedly far inferior to the true body. It was this disparity that caused the collision between the two to produce a serious deviation from the appearance in Luo Nan's memories. But it didn't matter. Only by discovering the deviation could he begin to correct it. Luo Nan actually felt that the difficulty of his current work had dropped. From his perspective, the preparatory work before was like making proofs and building models. It was like the last big question on a math exam. If he knew it, he knew it. If he didn't know it, he didn't know it. Everything had to be created from nothing. Everything had to be logically complete. And now, he finally had a basic framework to refer to. He also had a few plausible answers to choose from. It was similar to a multiple-choice question. Of course, he could save quite a bit of brainpower. It didn't matter if he made a mistake for a moment. No one would deduct points. At worst, he could just start over if a piece collapsed. And this was a bit like the situation in the Misty Maze. Luo Nan was even more familiar with this sort of piecemeal puzzle work. With Luo Nan's current mobilization of computing power, his advancement speed was quite fast. He had a clearer understanding of the basic configuration and outline of the mica mother. Of course, it was impossible for him to achieve everything in one go. Luo Nan never had such extravagant hopes. He just wanted to solidify his foundation a bit more. He didn't want to do a complete simulation on a large scale. Instead, he wanted to make a true leap. He wanted to take that step from the relatively simple saturated structure of water vapor in the material plane to the living plane. Cough. He was clearly thinking too much. He didn't need to truly act on the material state. He just needed to make a false leap on the configuration plane. He was quite satisfied with silly sand stable substrate simulation configuration that could withstand the test. He couldn't possibly hope to forcefully create a magnetic optic mica. With this sort of standard in mind, Luo Nan felt that he wasn't too far from achieving his goal. He had this sort of feeling. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The leap was a kind of qualitative change. It was just a bit more. Perhaps it would require a much greater accumulation than before. It was even possible that he would have to start over from scratch. But Luo Nan had an intense premonition. It was an intuition built upon the foundation of a solid configuration design. Perhaps this was where the spirituality of the school of fantasy lay. The direction shouldn't be wrong. It was just a bit more. Then he had to do his work a bit more solidly. Zhang Yingying narrowed her eyes to the side. She half covered her forehead with her palm, blocking the violent whirlwind and sand that assaulted her face. She did her best to lock onto the position of her son, but she couldn't help but worry. The only thing that made her feel at ease was that the chess pieces on the sand table, aside from the two at the very front, were all obediently staying in the background. They wouldn't step on silly sand at all. But she didn't know what would happen next. Zhang Yingying turned her head, wanting to ask a question, but she forcefully restrained herself for fear of causing a disturbance. The current Luo Nan felt like a focused conductor. He flicked his fingers and swung his arms in the air of nothingness. His movements weren't large, but he was very restrained and very calm. But he was much more invested than his previous attitude of watching with cold eyes. She couldn't see any corresponding changes on the sand table, but Zhang Yingying furrowed her brows and raised her head to look at the sky. The sky was overcast. The sun had been able to barely pierce through the layer of mist and clouds, showing off some of its existence. But after the whirlwind of sand and pebbles, the sun was completely hidden behind the layer of clouds. Actually, the boundaries of the cloud layer were nearly impossible to see. There was only a gloomy, leaden expanse. Zhang Yingying could still feel that the humidity of the atmosphere had clearly increased. The air pressure was dropping as well. This should be a process of continuous development. It was just that it had been suppressed by the momentum of the sweeping sandstorm earlier. It was only now that it was barely manifested. And these weren't the main points. Zhang Yingying discovered that the most crucial factor in this series of changes was thunder. She muttered. She wasn't too sure because the vibrations in the atmosphere were far too weak. Perhaps it was just a misconception. Oh, a misconception. F***CK. Zhang Yingying jumped in fright. She never thought that Luo Nan would be able to hear her muttering to herself at this time. Luo Nan chatted with her, "Don't get distracted. It's fine. I'm quite focused. Also, there are times when the atmosphere is very fragile." Huh. Luo Nan laughed and continued with his previous actions. It looked like he really was quite relaxed. A few seconds later, he even pursed his lips and began to whistle. He clearly didn't have much technique. His whistle was a bit hoarse at first, but his extraordinary control over his fleshly body helped him quickly find the right path. The whistle grew clearer and clearer. Later on, it struck together with the surging sandstorm, causing it to be particularly intense. It was quite fitting for the current situation on the beach. But later on, the gradually lengthened and turned low. It seemed to be a bit spacious and desolate. This bro's mood. Huh. Zhang Yingying didn't know what to use to describe it for a time. When he whistled, his mind should be relaxed and his mood good. But she just couldn't experience a similar feeling. The melody isn't bad. What song is it? A new song composed by Sister Moya? Zhang Yingying quietly used the ability to recognize songs by listening, but she didn't gain anything. Hum whatever. Luo Nan also paused to reply. He didn't even know how he had hummed. He had whistled out. Yes, it was Wei Si's song, Scarlet Wheel. Clearly, he had been infected by Liang Lu. Liang Lu was focused on her work. She would do this when she was in a good mood. Luo Nan didn't really like it at first. From his perspective, the concert would draw other thoughts and disturb his normal work. But Liang Lu spoke eloquently. She said that the school of creation was most proficient in precise planning. She divided the brain. She needed a buffer or a metronome to effectively plan the pace of the task. In any case, she had ample theoretical support. Luo Nan didn't comment at the time, but now he suddenly felt, not bad. He searched for the feeling, pursed his lips, and whistled. It was the song that he didn't quite understand the meaning of. Amidst this ear-scratching yet unfamiliar tune, he seemed to have returned to the relay station in his days. He was at his own workstation, in that sealed yet unexpectedly fulfilling environment. He faced countless broken machines, and he was next to interesting and reliable comrades. He made the incomplete become whole, and he made the damaged reconstruct and renovate. Everything was very familiar. It flowed smoothly, and it wasn't dull. It was as if he could work endlessly until the entire base was full of vitality and operation. Well, there weren't such workstations in reality. There was such a base. Even comrades seemed to be nothing more than refactoring code in the void. But right now, there were indeed innumerable incorporeal structures before Luo Nan's eyes. They slowly shifted and changed. They worked in harmony, causing a marvelous force to faintly give birth. Even though there were many discords within, the incorporeal structures rubbed against each other, shaking and vibrating until the cacophony was jumbled and the dark hummed. Chapter 987. The dark clouds on the coastline quickly spread inland, and the sky above T-City quickly darkened. Of course, this was meaningless in the room where the curtains were still closed. Instead of looking out of the window, it was better to spend more effort to think about the moods of his parents. In a villa at the edge of the city, the party had already ended a long time ago. After a night of noise and venting, most of the people had already exhausted all their energy and hormones. Those who needed to leave had already left, and those who were left were those who had overplayed themselves. They were sprawled on the sofa, the floor, the bathroom, the side of the pool, and some were even floating on the water surface. Their clothes were disheveled, and some had even been soaked in alcohol to the point of stupidity. They were sleeping like dead dogs. These were all people with good fortune. They only cared about playing and went to sleep after they were done playing. The host squandered a lot of money and found beautiful women and handsome men from all over T-City, ensuring that every guest who attended the party would have a heaven-like enjoyment. Even the special service staff who were hired could earn a lot of money that far exceeded the standard. This was a situation where everyone was happy. However, no matter what kind of group it was, there would always be a few unlucky people. For example, the beautiful dealer who was so sleepy that she was about to smash her head on the gambling table, and the masseuse who was also sleepy but still had to smile and work hard to massage the shoulders and legs of the guests. Perhaps this also included the two professional managers who were just there to make up for the occasion and had almost been stripped naked. They were even worse than the service staff around them. They drank too much, stayed up too late, were overly excited, and were overly afraid. Now, they didn't even know what cards they were playing. Fortunately, the two real big shots at the table were just casually playing and playing with the atmosphere. Now, one of the big shots had already started to yawn in a half-serious and half-fake manner. At the moment, his image wasn't much better than the men and women who were playing with him. He had a cigarette in his mouth and was only wearing a pair of underpants. There was a red wine stain that had already dried up on his chest. The most eye-catching thing was on his forehead. Next to his eyebrows, there were a few thick and long parallel lines drawn horizontally across his forehead. It looked like the wrinkles on the forehead drawn by the worst artist. There was also a line of words at the top of the line. I'm a blood demon. I'm a sand sculpture. As a dignified extraordinary blood demon, he had led a wolf into his house. Now, the female wolf opposite him seemed to be happy, but he had a favor to ask, so he was too embarrassed to ask her to stop. He could only roll his eyes and continue playing. Of course, he had to find some way to hint at it. There's no end to the seaside. It's fine if these researchers are used to stretching the battle line, but none of them know how to speak human language. It's as if they're afraid that they won't be able to intimidate others. Opposite him was a woman wearing typical nightclub makeup. It was so thick that it almost drowned out her own uniqueness. She was not much different from the other female attendants in the room. If one had to find something different, then this lady was probably the most well-dressed person in the villa. So far, she had only taken off her jacket, revealing a shirt that revealed her shoulders. His shoulder-length, slightly curly black hair swayed slightly on his fair, fleshy shoulders. At the same time, the hands of the unlucky masseuse were also slowly massaging this area. Her delicate and well-maintained hands rubbed against the snow-white, tight flesh. Overall, it was quite pleasing to the eye. The blood demon, however, was not in the mood to look at him. He glanced at the change in the man's expression and laughed. But this is good too. With this guy as a comparison, our business with visual impact will definitely make a lot of money. Unable to stand the blood demon's absurd logic, the lady in heavy makeup finally spoke. Because you came up with the idea of selling poker cards instead of a magazine? How much are you going to sell a deck of cards for? What do you mean by deputy? We're talking about cards. As I expected, you're still selling poker cards. You invited me to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine. Have I become the director of a printing factory? I'm the deputy editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief can only be me. While smoking, the blood demon rubbed the two cards in his hands back and forth, as if he were showing off his bright future. We're just going to change the format, and the worthless, ragged magazine will be reborn in flames. Why? Because we're a match made in heaven. Thud. The pen that was used to pay for the bet brushed past the blood demon's ear and pierced through the wall behind him. Because it was so fast, nobody else felt it at all. They only thought that the thing had been thrown to an invisible corner. What the F***CK. The blood demon instinctively wanted to curse, but when he saw the cold, disdainful glint under the thick eyeshadow of the other party, the latter part of his sentence was blurred. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. I'm just saying that with your psychic abilities as an endorsement, my extraordinary style control, and a topical poker card ranking, this magazine will be an authoritative information release organization in the future. Its name will go down in history. You're in such a hurry to enter history. Are you tired of living? The lady in heavy makeup mocked. Her slender fingers moved nimbly, and the two cards that had already formed a black jack shuttled back and forth between her fingers. From the looks of it, you bought the Cards magazine because you're really prepared to go all out? I thought you just wanted to torture these two pitiful wretches. On the other side, the two professional managers who were also the former managers of the Cards magazine were about to collapse under the gambling table. They didn't even have the strength to smile. They were also people from the inner world, and they more or less had some reputation. However, after a night of tormenting by the side of two extraordinaries, both their bodies and minds had been worn out. At this time, the blood demon looked over with a smile. Frankly speaking, we did have some similar considerations. Do you know why, former chief editor? The former chief editor answered absent-mindedly, we've already switched to hearts. 10 hearts. The blood demon very seriously corrected the details. I won't talk about the problem of you placing me in the diamonds suit, but why did you exclude me from the character card series after switching to parts? And it was behind Marlon. Are you expressing your dissatisfaction? There are 80 to 90 extraordinaries in the world, and you only chose half of them. That's already bold enough. You arranged seats for everyone and made it even fatter. In the end, you even expressed such obvious discrimination in the seating arrangement. Do you have a severe fatty liver? If it weren't for me, Lord Blood Demon, disregarding my reputation and coming out to turn the tide, to what extent were you prepared to magnify this directional error? This wasn't the first time the two, former editor-in-chief, had heard the exact same words. This time, the former editor-in-chief finally rolled his eyes and fell backward. In a show of loyalty, he knocked down his old partner. The two of them fell off the gambling table and fell unconscious. The lady in heavy makeup continued to skillfully switch the cards, turning a blind eye to the situation. Marlon was able to enter the character card series because of his status as the first vice president. This blessing. As for you, where did you get the courage to place yourself in the top 16 of the extraordinaries? This is just a gossip magazine. Isn't it good to be a topic of conversation? The blood demon, on the other hand, was in the right. It's fine if the spade suit didn't choose me, but they threw a law-abiding citizen like me into that diamond, with people like Apollon, Nick, and Corny. Shouldn't they give me an explanation? Oh, that's right. There's also Poseidon, a mutant. The lady in heavy makeup looked at him seriously and reminded him, I'm the 2 of diamonds. 2 is a good position. A newcomer with potential, a god in every version. He can soar into the sky at any time. It doesn't matter which suit he is. Just like the 4 aces, aren't they exclusive to the 4 leaders of the 3 churches? The blood demon blinked in reply. Of course, if you really mind, that's even better. We'll immediately form an Avengers alliance and take this shitty magazine. Sorry, I don't step on shit. It's just a description. This is a career. A great career that reshuffles the cards in the world. Think about it. You're a deputy editor and have the right to decide the suit and number of the cards. Don't you want to change the position of some people? The blood demon hid the cards in his hand completely and winked at the other side. Think about it. You definitely have your own ideas. That's true. For example, the old witch has done so many bad things in the dark. Why should she be in the plum blossom sequence and be a spiritual grandmaster, while I have to be on the same level as a mutant? Ha, ha ha. Anyway, that's right. Mr. Blood Demon, who was obviously at a disadvantage in the game, used his loud voice as a cover to wipe the bottom of the thigh of the beautiful dealer beside him. When the latter let out a rather slow and muffled groan, he pulled his hand back and blew at the corner of his mouth. We're going to turn the world upside down. We're going to win. The 2 thin cards were thrown down with a loud bang. On the green velvet gambling table, the open and hidden cards that had already been distributed, and even the old and new cards that had already been stacked, all of them trembled, and it was as if they were fried and flipped over, the kind that flipped over. Oh my, I've used too much force. But it's this force that gives me the ability to turn stone into gold, ha 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 ha. In his insincere reaction, the surreal scene that Blood Demon single-handedly created caused the female dealer by the gambling table to be dumbfounded, and she began to doubt her life. It also scared the masseuse on the other side. As she cried out in surprise, she withdrew her hand and retreated, but the lady with thick makeup in front of her pressed down on the back of her hand and placed it on her shoulder. The masseuse's right hand was grabbed, and she quickly reacted to the situation. I'm sorry, Madame Mora. As she spoke, she tried to withdraw her hand, but Madame Mora, who was in front of her, pressed down on her hand with surprising strength. She even had the extra strength to use her thumb to gently caress the back of her hand. The masseuse was a little surprised, but she could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. She immediately made the most professional choice. As if nothing had happened, she even put back her left hand that she had already withdrawn and continued with her previous work. As for what would happen to the nature of her work after this, it was not something that she could control. Generally speaking, she did not reject having sex with the female clients she served, as long as the money was sufficient. For a client like Madame Mora, who was not bad-looking and whose skin was so good that it was against the rules, it was practically an extra privilege in the workplace. Even though everything before his eyes was a little magical. Why, only a little? Chapter 988. The masseuse was a little absent-minded. Perhaps it was because of this that she felt something extra in her hand. It was sensitive and enjoyable. There was also an indescribable sourness that stirred in her hand. Right at this moment, Madame Mora's voice traveled into her ears again. Our physiques are very similar. We are both of medium height, but our bodies are fit, huh? Lipstick is the same color, and perfume is similar. Perhaps we have the same hobby. Do you like to work out? Madame Mora casually played with the cards in her hand and threw them back onto the gambling table. She looked like she could not be bothered to communicate with the owner, who had no gambling ethics, but her interest in the latter part of the game increased. With the magical scene in front of her, the masseuse could not help but feel a little nervous. Working out? Ah, yes. How many times do you do your maintenance every week? Two times. Your makeup is not bad. Which type of sunscreen do you use? Foundation? Hair removal fluid? Bra. The series of questions completely confused the masseuse. The question that could have been easily answered had now become a stumbling block. At the end of the day, these were all female instincts. In the end, she still managed to finish answering. Madame Mora nodded. You're really diligent. Unfortunately, other than deceiving yourself, there is no other effect. The masseuse was speechless. Blood Demon cackled at the gambling table. You're doing this again. I'm just stating the facts. Clear lines, big pores, lots of color spots, a lot of oil, oh, and body hair and body odor. Sorry, I'm just that sensitive. Especially since you look a little like a middle-aged woman I know. Mora's thumb rubbed the back of the masseuse's hand all the way to her wrist before she let go. In the end, she even shook her hand and shrugged, making the exposed areas of her body more dynamic and lively. She also made a perfect counterexample. Are you envious? Clean, cool, soft, and flawless. Are you jealous? Once you lose your youth, you can never get it back. Before you have the time to fill your heart, all the actions you take after that will only be meaningless struggles in despair. You will never be able to achieve the goal that you're envious of and jealous of. You can't even hope for her to sink to your level. In this case, it's right to be jealous. Rich psychological activities are the highest level of your body and mind. Of course, it will never satisfy you. It will only become a joke to others, such as me. The masseuse stood there dumbfounded, momentarily forgetting to be angry. She had no idea what to do next. The Blood Demon rolled his eyes. What are you talking about? He's been through a lot. Even though he's no match for you in every aspect, he might be mentally stronger than you. If I had known that you were still so vile, I would have found an ability user for you. It would be best if it was a physical one. Oh. Didn't you say it before? Mortals are unsightly, awakened ones are starting to improve, architects are barely decent, and extraordinaries are only cute. The problem is that my business here has just started, so I can't get Wu Jiong to massage your shoulders, right? That's a very good hope. Mola laughed loudly. Her dark red lip gloss and snow-white teeth formed an extremely beautiful visual effect. Even though she did not have the reserved demeanor of a woman, she was the side that the Blood Demon admired the most. However, Mola quickly shook her head. Compared to a metal rock that I can't bite through, I'd rather find a more tender one. A boy is fine too, as long as it tastes good. Hee hee, you must have been dumped by a martial monarch, and you just haven't found the cooking method yet. So you've taken a fancy to the most tender extraordinaries? Not so long ago, you were the synonym for tender. tender? You're talking about Luonan? Mo La extended her hand and waved at the blood demon. The blood demon understood and flicked a cigarette over. Originally, it should have been the masseuse's turn to display her value, but the latter was completely lifeless. She had no reaction at all. Mo La didn't mind. She held the cigarette in her mouth, and the tip of the cigarette automatically lit up without any movement. This is a new dish that's still endlessly adding ingredients to the pot. The recipe looks pretty good, they're clearly playing chess, okay. No matter how much they tried to downplay the matter on Zeolite Beach, in reality, they would pay attention to it. The only difference was the depth of the matter. Let's not talk about other things, but the method of stimulating the blood flame order is really quite interesting. The pattern is novel, and the posture is beautiful. The blood demon wanted to have a good discussion with Mo La. Why don't you give him a segment or something? Speaking of which, he's also a psychic. Wouldn't it be easier for you to make a judgment? After all, the newest edition of the poker game, the magazine, was about to be released into the market. How to position the rising star that came out of nowhere would determine the authority of the ranking to a large extent. Even if he was playing, authority was necessary. He forcefully bought the magazine for fun, not to act like a clown. Mo La puffed out a cloud of smoke. I said he's a noob, but you insisted on playing chess. Fine, he can also be considered a chef, an interesting chef. Just thinking about it makes one want to eat him, but not now. Yep, there's one more thing that needs to be emphasized. Not all extraordinaries are cute and easy to eat. Some people are destined to be the representatives of decay and ugliness, as well as the piggy banks of jealousy and hatred. Stop, stop, stop. The blood demon hurriedly called for a halt. Words and deeds are bound to be marked. I know that you and the damned witch are absolutely irreconcilable, but can you not cause trouble for me? I'm a person with property now, and I can't afford to be tormented, especially by two psychics. She's far away in Boo City, but her disciple is in T City. You can go and torment him to vent your anger. The Star Witch is also in T City. That's quite filial. Also, I didn't say it was her. You said it. Mo La took a deep breath, and the cigarette in his hand burned to the bottom. He then puffed it out, and the smoke was like an arrow, hitting the blood demon's face. He then stood up. Unfortunately, I'm just passing by and can't stay for long. I'm leaving. The blood demon did not mind, but he found it strange. It's rare for T City to be so lively. Since you're here, why aren't you joining in? I'm visiting my relatives, and I'm eager to go home. You're a cursed loner, what relatives do you have? It can't be a blood connection. That's very much like a psychic. Sorry, I won't answer your personal questions. Mo La did not continue chatting. She took her jacket and kissed the masseuse's cheek. She then strode out of the room. Behind the door, she suddenly turned around and smiled. She pointed her finger at her lips and blew another kiss at the masseuse. Bye-bye, Granny. I hope there's another person who hates me in this world. After she finished speaking, her figure flashed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. F***CK. The blood demon finally came back to his senses. He jumped up and wanted to run, but he was still too late. The restraints that Mo La had placed on the masseuse previously broke silently due to the time limit and the strength of the restraints, and the last of the spirit waves spread out. The sinister thoughts that came from an unknown and distant region were like mushrooms that grew rapidly on rotten roots after rain. They quickly appeared on the masseuse's body and moved her eyeballs slightly in their sockets. She looked over coldly. Damn it. The blood demon cursed in his heart, but he quickly controlled his expression. He smiled widely at the masseuse, who had become a temporary parasite. Granny Wu, why are you so free to come over? Brother Star Sorcerer, it must be tiring to be your signal tower every day. The masseuse stared at him and opened her mouth, but no sound came out. In reality, she had said it was just that her spirit and body were not in harmony. Her thoughts and body were not synchronized. The blood demon did not find it strange. Even if this damned witch was the strongest shaman in the world, it was too difficult for her to break through the restrictions set up by an extraordinary shaman and control an unfamiliar body from such a long distance away. She had to go through 2 transmissions and break through the restrictions set up by an extraordinary shaman. The Death Witch, who was also the Granny Wu in his mouth and the damned witch in his heart, had never been a patient person. After another second, the masseuse's heavily made-up face suddenly had a strange expression. The corners of her lips curled into a faint smile. Then, it distorted, dislocated, and cracked. The beautiful dealer on the other side happened to see this scene. She wanted to scream, but she could only let air fill her throat. Her entire body convulsed. The moment before her entire face shattered, a voice finally came out. "I'm the chief editor. All right. It's like adding wings to a tiger." The blood demon quickly came to a consensus with this person. As for whether this person was purely competing with Mora or had a deeper plan in mind, he did not have the time to care about what kind of trouble this overly luxurious editing department would cause in the future. The conversation ended, and the masseuse ended her mission. The result of being dominated by supernatural powers was that his entire face and even the skin, flesh, and bones above his chest were abruptly torn apart. He was like a rotten watermelon that had been slashed by the wind saber technique. His body fluids gushed out, and he fell on the table. The beautiful dealer's scream finally broke through her throat. She staggered backward, but her 12-centimeter-high heels could not support her trembling body. She fell to the ground on her, but after taking 2 steps. Her scream was also dispelled. She could only use her hands and feet to retreat with all her might. She wanted to widen the distance between her and this terrifying scene and the terrifying person. The blood demon did not even bother to bat an eyelid. He only extended his hand and wiped his bare chest. As expected, there was some blood on it. He sighed, licked his lips, and tasted it. "It's sour." He spat out a mouthful of saliva, extended his leg, and kicked the unconscious former chief editor who was splashed with blood. "Hey, wake up. My chief editor's office is going to be changed into the president's office. It's urgent." When this moaning person came back to his senses, the blood demon turned around and looked at the messy gambling table. "All right, the number of people who hate you doesn't increase, and the business isn't losing money or earning money. I'll just treat it as having some fun." Mora, who was far away, probably could not hear him. The blood demon was just saying it casually. He sighed again and turned to look at the beautiful dealer who had already broken down. He put on a very honest smile. "Don't be afraid. I'm not as serious as Mora. I don't mind meat or vegetables. Since it's already like this, why don't we just let loose and have some fun?" The heart-wrenching screams were destined to be unable to go beyond the walls of the villa. However, the spirit waves released by extremely terrified and despairing people were sharper than any sound waves to sensitive spirit mediums. On the street, Emola, who had his hands in his pockets and was walking leisurely, pursed his lips at that moment. His gaze was cast toward the sky, looking at the gloomy clouds. He was also trying to capture the dark region that vaguely existed at a deeper level, as well as the buzzing noises that seemed like an illusion. Chapter 989. Luo Nan had never been out to sea in his entire life. This was an obvious lie, but it was his first time riding a boat into the sea in the manner of a normal person. He had personally experienced the scene of fighting against the raging waves and stormy waves. Yes, he didn't enjoy the leisurely nighttime fishing life that Zhang Yingying had announced. Instead, he encountered the sudden gale and giant waves of the southern Pacific Ocean. Perhaps it was because it wasn't completely night yet? In the boundless sea, the stability of a boat's hull was proportional to its volume when encountering wind and waves. If it was a luxurious giant ship like the Jade Light, the normal level 7 or 8 winds and 7 or 8 meter waves would be easily crushed through. But right now, Luo Nan was riding a semi-leisure yacht. Even though it was a large one. This expensive toy appeared slender. Its body length was nearly 100 meters, and the deck height was no more than 15 meters. It undulated between the waves, as if it wanted to drill directly into the sea. Even though it was a yacht, there was no comfort to speak of under such weather and sea conditions. If safety ropes weren't fastened, one would have to play human bowling in the cabin. Especially since it was sailing at a speed of 40 knots under the gale and giant waves. It was simply flying from one wave to another, maintaining a fragile balance amidst the intense turbulence. Luo Nan just happened to be at the bow of the boat, at the forefront of the wrestling between the hull and the giant waves. His arms were propped up on the deck railing. He was like a tourist enjoying the seascape, allowing the tons of seawater to sweep over him. This scene was a bit artificial, but he was just a body of water vapor here. It wouldn't be a problem for him to completely scatter the water. In comparison, Zhang Yingying was the real iron-headed doll. She settled down the incubator of her own son, making sure that it wouldn't be damaged by the ups and downs. Then she impatiently rushed to the bow of the boat, letting the seawater drench her body. She laughed loudly as she staggered, enjoying the thrill of madness to her heart's content. Due to the suppression of the roaring sea wind and giant waves, all of her words had to be shouted. It feels great. Boss personally steers the helm. It feels great. Luo Nan had to admit that Her Majesty Empress Wu really knew how to give people pleasant surprises. She said to leave by sea, and it was arranged. Moreover, he had condescended to personally take charge of a recreational yacht. He really didn't look like his usual quiet and serene self. Luo Nan began to believe it. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu really was an explorer. There was a crazy factor in her bones. However, what are you doing here? Tons of seawater swept onto the deck, and apart from the shocking impact, there was also a low and hoarse sound, which made people wonder if the strength of the structure was really suitable for the current environment. Steel was already like this, let alone humans. Luo Nan was a bit worried about Zhang Yingying's safety. Are you going to be a concubine in the Dragon Palace? You don't understand. To me, this kind of weather is my fate. My white rainbow was enlightened at this kind of time. As he spoke, there was a hissing sound in the atmosphere full of water vapor. An oncoming wave actually split in the middle, forcibly separating. As the saying goes, drawing a knife to cut the water. Luo Nan laughed dryly and clapped to liven things up for Miss Zhang. However, this was the first time Luo Nan had heard of the details of Zhang Yingying's ability awakening. It was a bit of a legend, but it was very reasonable. After all, no one was an innate ability user. Her ability awakened under extreme circumstances, and the unique aura of white rainbow was very much in line with the logic of human thought. No wonder you always go to the seaside when you're cultivating behind closed doors in Xia City. Yeah. The feeling I get from diving in the sea and striking the waves is very wonderful. I need to get excited at times like this. Luo Nan continued to laugh dryly and continued to clap weakly. Zhang Yingying narrowed her eyes. Speaking of which, something's on your mind. I'm not. Hee hee, then who are you showing that stinky face to? You can't even hide it from silly sand. I can confirm that it's currently insensitive to human emotions. I'm going to chop you up again. Believe it or not. The experiment won't go smoothly. That can't be right. I see that you can't wait to end the experiment. Everyone is stupefied by you. It's like they stole a chicken. Is it that obvious? Luo Nan reflected on his own expression, but he soon gave up. He just answered frankly, the experiment went very smoothly. I just thought of some things. It was like a dream. Stop. You don't need to look at me like this. This matter is very private. I'll think about it myself. Luo Nan looked at Zhang Yingying's starry eyes that instantly glowed with curiosity. Zhang Yingying curled her lips. Then go and think about it blindly. Luo Nan laughed as well. He suddenly sighed halfway through his laughter. There are some things that can't be pondered over. Luo Nan's mood became a bit gloomy when he spoke to this point. It was just as he said. There were some things that couldn't be pondered over. Even if it was a dream that came from nothingness, it would be pierced and dissected by all sorts of psychological analysis until it was drenched in blood. What's more, it was such a realistic scene. That's right. Luo Nan was pondering over matters related to the dream right now. On Zeolite Beach, the melody of the Crimson Will was engraved in his heart. It lingered in the air of reality for the first time. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now that he thought about it, it was an attack comparable to sin poison tearing apart the dimensional wall. It wasn't that direct, but it leaked out unwittingly. By the time Luo Nan realized it, deep imprints had already been carved into the planes of emotion and reason. How could he view it as a dream? Well, Luo Nan didn't view a dream as a dream in the past. But due to the sense of distance between the dream and reality, he instinctively avoided the logical chain of reality that would bring the two closer together. He didn't go and ponder deeply over the magnificent interstellar era of the distant light concealment galaxy. He didn't know why the heavenly Yuan Empire, which was struggling in desperate straits, would form such a peculiar connection with Earth, which currently hung alone in the universe. But the reality was that Luo Nan had come into contact with things related to supernatural powers on Earth. Often, he would be able to link together with the other side after a few twists and turns. The others were fine. The most typical example was the burner, deep blue walker system. The dynamo core that was necessary for the burner transformation. The formatted space and the bloodshed field. Of course, there was also the deep blue platform. Especially this one. The 4th Division would explode. The so-called 4th Division was the abbreviation for the 4th Equipment Division of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. It was the research and manufacturing center of the Empire's lightweight armor. Luo Nan couldn't avoid this when it came to diagnosing and repairing warframes in the relay station scene. His ears were hurting from listening to it. Why would the 4th Division explode? It was a crude imitation of the deep blue platform. Perhaps some new things had been mixed in, but Luo Nan, who had received training as a maintenance soldier in the interruption station, could see through its most basic design ideas with a single glance. The later matured versions were fine. At the very least, they made some adaptable adjustments according to the specific level of Earth's material processing capabilities. But the ones from before, especially the experimental machine that Luo Nan used on Zeolite Beach, were completely copied from the path of the 4 classic molds. The original classic design appeared full of flaws due to the lack of energy, materials, artificial intelligence, and the jade crystal array. These weren't the main points. The deep information hidden behind these superficial phenomena was what Luo Nan couldn't help but ponder and guess at: the deep blue walker and its transplant. Were they related to the Heavenly Yuan Empire? How did that transplant come to Earth from some unknown place in the Hangguang Galaxy? What position did he hold in the end? Was this fellow Li Wei, who was currently nowhere to be seen? Of course, it was possible that there wasn't such a person. It was just like Luo Nan's external core or Jean Tong's divine binding hoop. Did they come from the ruins of a floating civilization? It was just like the labyrinth behind the cloud world, the abyss sun will in the depths of the hazy and boundless spacetime fragments, and the tattered spaceship at its edge. Who was the owner of the spaceship? Was it Liang Lu? Luo Nan couldn't help but guess due to the high degree of correlation between the external neuron and the other side. Of course, it was just a guess. The problem was that there was a continuous stream of evidence the moment such a thought arose. It was like a roaring storm pouncing over. It wasn't just the stacking interference technology thesis in the external neurons database. After all, the thesis in the database could come from any channel. Even Zhang He's thesis was preserved there. But let's not talk about the thesis. Let's talk about the real thing. The invisible muslin, which was highly compatible with the thesis, was inevitably scarce no matter what era or civilization it was. It was an advanced artifact that Liang Lu had already confirmed to be extremely difficult to replicate. Why did it also fall to Earth, and why was it torn into 2 halves? Why did the first scene of the inner universe simulator cut into the relay station, which was highly related to Liang Lu? Luo Nan couldn't help but think. What happened to Liang Lu and those people at the relay station in the end? Was that scene a simulated plot, or was it an event that truly happened? Were those people simulated data, or did they truly exist? At the very least, were they projections that once existed? If it really was a reproduction of a certain true scene, then even if Luo Nan could imagine a happy ending for the battle situation at the relay station, what happened afterwards? Even if Luo Nan excluded the idea that Liang Lu had drifted to Earth in the end, which was too much of a coincidence, it was hard for Luo Nan to imagine that Liang Lu's stacking interference technology was Liang Lu's invention. It was the environment that the heavenly Yuan Empire should have. Aside from the vigilance and caution of the mental plane, Luo Nan had never experienced the harsh and callous pressure of a so-called god in the relay station. Did the Hongguang Galaxies' assault on the Crimson Wool Rift fail in the end? The thousands of years of effort of the Heavenly Abyss clan were ultimately annihilated in a puff of smoke? Did the current Hongguang Galaxy degenerate into a vicious hell? Or did it become a paradise for fantasy types or outer realm types? Or was it under the rule of some interstellar civilization? Was it the Star Alliance? Was it the Kingdom of Gods? Or was it something else? What sort of fate did those people and those faces within the relay station of Outpost 4 have? Luo Nan wanted to know. He wanted to know no matter what. Chapter 990. Whether it was because of illusory emotions or because of intrinsic curiosity, Luo Nan had a drive to seek answers. And as his thoughts continued to penetrate deeper and deeper, this driving force continued to accelerate and expand. Luo Nan had tried to seek answers from the inner universe simulator, but it was to no avail. Instead, the more he dug, the greater the expanse of emptiness appeared before his eyes. There was no way to fill in the blanks. There were all sorts of details that revealed vague trends. Just thinking about it made his heart clench into a ball. For the time being, Luo Nan didn't know what he should do or what he could do. Perhaps he would overexert himself and turn into an idiot who chased after an illusory dreamland. However, Luo Nan also believed that as long as he followed his current rhythm on this path without stopping for even a moment, there would be a day sooner or later. Perhaps in the near future, he would touch the edge of that illusory dreamland. He would touch the traces left behind in reality. Whether it was the current Deep Blue Walker or the phantom hidden behind Deep Blue's Apocalypse Laboratory, perhaps there were other things hidden even deeper. Luo Nan possessed a high degree of sensitivity towards these things. He just needed to wait for an opportunity to make contact. In fact, just like the theory of superconfiguration described, as long as one's existence increased, under the effects of superconnection and superinterference, on the fantasy level, the external environment and even the entire world would be distorted into what one wanted. All right, he was thinking a bit too much. Right now, no matter how much Luo Nan thought about it, it was impossible for him to make the truth of the universe rotate according to his will. At most, he could make the wind and waves that assaulted his face a bit larger. Zhang Yingying really knew how to give people space. She didn't pester Luo Nan to get to the bottom of things. She just let Luo Nan think blindly. She just stayed by his side and enjoyed the blessing of her life's giant waves. She chopped 17 or 18 times in a row. Some waves were successfully chopped, while others were not strong enough. She was drenched from head to toe. She only stopped when she saw Luo Nan's attention return to reality. Today's waves are a bit big. Boss said that it's not just because of the weather. Yeah, this. Luo Nan calmed his mind and was just about to continue chatting with Zhang Yingying when another person walked up to the front deck against the wind and waves. The person spoke in a deep voice, "Sir, the mutants in the sea are a bit restless. Their emotions are quite obvious." It was Meng Chong. Compared to Zhang Yingying, who was swaying left and right, this person was much more stable. There was a layer of dim red light on his body, like a flame that was about to be extinguished. It seemed like it could be destroyed by the wind and waves at any time, but it could always be maintained and never extinguished. This was the residual effect of being a chess piece on the zeolite beach. There were still some problems with the chi activity of the mushed-mouth ape. After leaving, he could not quickly resolve the extreme power impact of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss area. He needed a long time to adjust and adapt. From his perspective, slowly cultivating was one way. But if he followed Luo Nan, he would be able to make adjustments in a timely manner. His efficiency would be higher. Therefore, he used the excuse of running errands for his mister to directly follow Luo Nan onto the ship. Luo Nan didn't care, and Her Majesty Empress Wu, the master of the house, didn't refuse. Compared to Zhang Yingying, Meng Chong was more experienced. He did not talk much, but he always hit the nail on the head. This could be the precursor to the formation of a small, tide rush, and we just happened to be there. But it could also be a simple chain reaction caused by a certain species. Regardless of the year or month, the ocean had never been safe. After the era of distortion, it became even more severe. The beginnings of distortion came from the ocean. This was basically a public opinion. This had always been the most active domain of the mutant species. Powerful aberrations could be found everywhere. Some traveled around the world with ocean currents, searching for food all over the globe. Some formed gigantic undersea nests and dominated an area. Occasionally, there would even be traces of extraordinary level creatures. Actually, Luo Nan didn't need Zhang Yingying and Meng Chong to remind him. He knew that there were many wild, chaotic, and irascible auras surrounding their flying yacht on the surface of the ocean. They followed their powerful instincts, moving stealthily beneath the roaring and surging waves, waiting for an opportunity to move. Some began to follow the yacht not long after it set out to sea. As the winds and waves gradually rose, not only did the number not decrease, but it rapidly increased. Luo Nan liked this a lot. Yes, that's right. He liked it a lot. This was because these violent yet powerful life forms followed and gathered above the violent winds and huge waves. Within the boundless black clouds, the clamorous noise that was suppressed by the terrible weather environment grew clearer and clearer. On a plane that other people were unable to sense, millions upon millions of control lines were dropping down from the cloud layer. Their target was no longer just the semi-dormant dumb sand. Instead, they were directly cast into the ocean. They churned within the seawater and stuck together with the violent mutant life forms. The millions upon millions of lines would occasionally collapse, occasionally increase and decrease. They were unstable. And every change occurred in units of tens of thousands, and the frequency of changes had already been compressed to the millisecond level. It was impossible for anyone's brain to fully monitor and calculate such a complex and chaotic situation. Not even Luo Nan could do it, but he had the massive cloud organism brain array, incomplete, to help with the processing. All sorts of structural data could be stored remotely into the external neuron and then retrieved and analyzed. Wasn't this the purpose of the built-in simulator function? Even though the Innerverse simulator had been affected by the overload simulation last time and was currently in the repair phase, its basic analysis and calculation functions were still reliable. Why didn't Luo Nan take the more efficient airship? Why did he strongly request to come to the ocean? It was absolutely not for the sake of leisurely night fishing, nor was it because he wanted to pull up a few groundless big fish. In the end, it was just this one reason. Luo Nan's initial experiment on Zeolite Beach had ended, but his true experiment had just begun. How was this even possible? This is just a small problem. Zhang Yingying confirmed that Luo Nan's mood was only temporarily depressed. She no longer cared about what thoughts were swirling in his mind. From her perspective, this was the time to properly enjoy the unique experience of the ocean. As for the so-called mutant population that followed the yacht, Her Majesty Empress Wu was on the ship to suppress it. There were also Luo Nan, Meng Chong, and other strong people. What was there to be afraid of? Come. Let's take a picture. Zhang Yingying used the floating camera that had played an important role not too long ago to take a picture of herself and Luo Nan. Yes, she also gave half of Meng Chong's face. Then she sent it to the group. Thinking about it wasn't enough, so she posted it on social media as well. She labeled it as Tide Maker. The effects of Luo Nan's live broadcast class were still in the ascendant. The shockwaves were still spreading through all kinds of media. It couldn't be said to have swept the entire world, but it was rapidly permeating through various domains related to the inner world. As one of the most important live streamers, Zhang Yingying's account update just happened to catch up to the crest of the wave. It immediately caused a large amount of reposts, and a group of people lamented in the comments section, "Why did it suddenly end? The warm-up took so long, and the climax was so short. You need to be careful at such a young age. Come in with a stupefied expression. Leave with a stupefied expression. My writing on the blackboard. Who has class notes I can borrow to copy? This damned capitalistic society. I've been charged for all the shared resources I've found." Zhang Yingying didn't care about this. She couldn't care. Right now, she was already in full swing chatting with the people in the group. She would send a photo of Luo Nan at the bow of the yacht from time to time. It could be considered a benefit for her friends. However, the fellows in the group were all greedy. "What are you posting pictures for? Start a live broadcast. Ask teacher Luo to give a small lesson. Don't use cavalry. Get infantry. There's nothing to see right now. He's still grieving over the changing seasons." When all was said and done, it was nothing more than a puff of water vapor. This was truly like a dream, an illusion, a bubble. How hateful. This was such a good opportunity. She couldn't even see if there was any material. Zhang Yingying muttered in her mind, but in the end, she complied with the will of the people. She displayed the function of the floating camera to its peak, giving Luo Nan a relatively stable shot amidst the violent storm. The signal transmission over the sea was just like that. Even though the psychic wave network did some optimization after receiving the signal, it could only barely be said to not lag. Meng Chong consciously retreated backwards, avoiding the area covered by the camera. He continued to stand steadily beneath the wind and waves, acting as a bodyguard. This could be considered his job. Come. Say hello to everyone. Sing a song or something. Perhaps it was just as Zhang Yingying said. Violent winds and giant waves were her life. She really was a bit high. A few hours ago, Luo Nan had whistled for no more than a few dozen seconds in total, but it had left him extremely amazed. He really wanted to try and see if he could squeeze out more from Luo Nan. Luo Nan still remembered a few fragments of the melody, but there was no need to, right? He just pretended not to hear and greeted everyone in the group. Then he skillfully changed the topic. "I almost forgot to ask you. You were talking about the diamond on the beach. What in the world does it mean?" Zhang Yingying curled her lips. "I shouldn't have had such hopes for you. What's the two of diamonds?" Luo Nan had just snuck him out. Papercut had become a negative example in front of all the ability users in the world. Only now did he tidy up his mood and go online. He thought that a new lesson had come out, so he asked in a hurry. "Let's play cards." Zhang Yingying responded in a bad mood. "I'll give you the two of diamonds. Do you want it? Go, Ghost Manager." Papercut was a veteran operator of a handicraft store. Whether it was playing cards or selling cards, he was considered a professional. Sure enough, your courage explodes when your name resounds. Bamboo Pole already understood what Zhang Yingying was talking about. He chuckled and sent a beautiful photo. The photo was a snapshot. Only the side profile of the target was captured. Through the gaps between the swaying strands of hair, Bamboo Pole was able to capture the outline of the woman's side profile, which was even more profound under the thick makeup. He could also see the sharp gaze that instantly stared into the camera. You even dare to manage this person. Speaking of which, the person who took this photo must have grass growing 3 feet above their graves, right? Sister Cat Eyes? Shui Lei interrupted. Godly cat eyes. No wonder you haven't been able to find a new home after being dumped last time. Gosh, I misread. Sorry. Shui Lei hurriedly apologized. Straight men mostly relied on their makeup to recognize people. In the circle, only Cat Eyes, who often hung out in nightclubs, would wear this sort of attire. There was no response from Cat Eyes. Holy crap. You guys are talking about the two of diamonds. Papercut finally came to a realization. He sent a thumbs down emoji. You guys are in the South Pacific. Then I'll wish you guys a happy reunion with the King of Diamonds. Chapter 991. K of Diamonds? Zhang Yingying didn't care. Hee, boss is here. Boss Luo can also make up the numbers. What am I afraid of? F***ck, brother Papercut is so ruthless. It seems that you were almost sliced into pieces by the Shangding building this morning. But I'm really drooling over Mola's type. It can be used to attack or defend, and it can also be used to attack or be useless. It's definitely a versatile style. Similarly, the active octopus also came online. When it came to the gossip of the extraordinaries, the atmosphere in the group heated up. Speaking of which, Her Majesty Empress Wu hasn't entered the deck yet? This edition should be in, and there have been a lot of changes in the past few years. Jin Buhuan, Jin Tong, Gong Qi. F***ck, I just found out that 2/3 of the people who need to change cards are related to Luo Yuan. Boss Luo should also be in the deck. I think 2 of Diamonds is quite suitable. Boss Luo has always kept a low profile. He might not authorize the magazine. The sudden interruption caused a row of vomiting emojis to fill the screen instantly. Do you really think I don't read the group chat? Luo Nan swiped through quite a few pages and discovered that he recognized every single word on the page. But when they were put together, it was like reading a heavenly book. He finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Don't just care about killing and burying. Can you give me an explanation? Nowadays, intellectual property rights are all charged. Zhang Yingying took the initiative to retort. The quality of today's live stream is so good. It's so tiring to watch. It's not easy to memorize the words on the blackboard, and it takes a lot of electricity to record, okay? If it wasn't for Yingying's parent-child program, I would have gone back to sleep. Some people's explanations are too inhuman. In the end, they only care about their own experiments and don't explain anything. It's really embarrassing for us researchers. The octopus was also full of complaints. I was almost dragged to the Shangding building to be dissected. In the end, I was laughed at by that brat He Dong Lu the entire way. Have you ever considered my feelings? Papercut was truly resentful. It was rare for him to be proud and pampered. After looking around, we know that our physical bodies have no human rights. As your senior brother, I don't have the face to tell my master. Xue Lei joined in the fun. Hee. Red Fox was the simplest. There were also a few people who didn't speak, but they also entered the spectator mode. Luo Nan blinked. Then we'll arrange for small classes. It's free. I don't even want honor points. Don't be like this. Honor points are definitely needed. It would be better to give everyone a share later. Zhang Yingying made the decision on Luo Nan's behalf. Luo Nan was very surprised. Could it be that in your eyes, I don't know how to surf the internet? With so much free time, I'm about to find out who started Card Deck magazine. There was an awkward silence in the group for a second. Octopus quickly answered, I know. Deck magazine is controlled by the Mystical Information Society. It's a semi-official media organization authorized by the Star Alliance Committee. It's said that the big shot behind them is Bai Hao. You know Bai Hao, right? He's a veteran extraordinaire. He lives in STEM City and works in the world government. He's the highest representative who connects with the inner world all year round. When you guys arrived at D City, didn't you pay your respects to the Mountain Head? That's old news. After Bai Hao retired 2 years ago, he didn't seem to care much about things on the surface. That's why the Deck magazine has always wanted to launch a supplementary deck, but it's difficult to produce it. Out of the 80 to 90 extraordinaries, only 52 of them were recorded. They even keep talking about the authorization. In fact, it's hard to say if there will be a next issue. I say, don't you guys read the economic news? Bamboo Pole was very astonished at the knowledge and information sensitivity of the human evolved elites in the group. Yesterday morning, the Mystical Information Society already made an announcement. Deck magazine has already changed hands, okay? The person who took over is also super high profile. What? Changed hands? By how is holding the line in the back? Who would dare to take over if they aren't extraordinaries? Wouldn't they be worried that there'll be another shocking gossip like, for the sake of the ghost card, Rabbi the Clown fights a secret battle with a High Lord? No, a natural disaster? Fuck, blood demon. Isn't this guy messing around? Following the transfer of the news link, the topics in the group once again deviated towards an unbearably chaotic state. However, Luo Nan, who was relying on himself to look up information, was already barely able to keep up with everyone's rhythm. At the very least, he already had a relatively clear understanding of what Zhang Yingying meant when she said, square. Simply speaking, the recently chaotic Deck magazine, which had a powerful background in the past, specifically targeted extraordinaries. It made a rather public, BA, ranking in the form of playing cards. They made it seem like they were wanted criminals. The above was Luo Nan's ridicule. The Deck magazine's ranking logic was as follows: there were 54 cards in a deck. The big and small ghost cards weren't used. They were left empty to show that the most powerful were undecided. The remaining 52 cards were divided into 4 suits. Each suit represented a type of extraordinary powerhouse. Among them, spades represented powerful and balanced. They believed that this type of extraordinaries didn't have any obvious weaknesses. They were strong enough to ignore weaknesses. They were considered the most powerful type. Hearts represented the pinnacle of flesh and blood. They chose people with powerful fleshly bodies. Plum represented the profundity of the spirit. They chose extraordinaries of the spirit side. Diamonds represented extremely troublesome. They chose the world's most famous troublemakers. They were extraordinary class ticking time bombs. There were also some small rules within this. For example, the 4 aces were just enough for the 4 leaders of the 3 great orders to divide them up. There was no need for further classification and ranking. The 4 number 2 cards were chosen from new extraordinaries. They showed that their potential was limitless. They could be the smallest cards, but they could also be the biggest cards aside from the ghost cards. They showed the rules of a generation, the will of a generation of gods. Also, it was generally believed that the 4 suits of J, Q, K, and A represented the strongest 16 people in the world, including mutants. This was because there was a mutant that was an exception. It was Poseidon, who was active in various regions of the world's oceans. He was the most powerful mutant in legend. He occupied the King of Diamonds. This was the blessing sent by Papercut. The Ace of Diamonds was true god Xianju of the Amaterasu order. Not to mention whether or not this was a coincidence, this position was very much in line with Luo Nan's heart. The focus of the discussion in the group right now was the Blood Demon, who was especially active on the internet and loved to cause trouble, had suddenly taken down this extremely controversial media magazine. He was definitely up to something. The key was what he was up to, and how he was going to do it. It didn't take long for the latest Deck magazine to be released. Powerful people like Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just become extraordinaries in the second half of last year, would definitely be on the list as long as she didn't explicitly oppose it. Then would the most eye-catching Luo Yuan be on the list as well? What suit and what position would they be in? Boss will definitely be in the spades group. But if he doesn't lose, he'll be in 2 of spades. Zhang Yingying was naturally filled with confidence. Bamboo Pole thought a bit more. You can say that there's no problem, but the spades group is full of people right now. They're all veteran powerhouses. Every one of them is unbelievably stable. I feel like we'll offend them no matter who we replace. You can't just ask President Ouyang to abdicate, right? Fuck. Maybe that blood demon fellow will dare to make the decision for someone else. He can't wait to see Xia City in chaos and have some fun for him to see. What about Boss Luo? And that Mr. Mo from Bansheng? So insincere. Isn't it boring? I'm talking about what suit? You won't admit it even if I tell you to feign ignorance. It's definitely two of Diamond's arrangement. My Miss Mola has been keeping a low profile lately. She's been cultivating her mind and character. She can totally be assigned to Plum Blossom. Bamboo Pole suddenly asked a question. Then how many cards do you think the sincere and smart Mr. Blood Demon will arrange for Boss Luo? The more Luo Nan understood the world, the more he felt that the twists and turns inside were far too complicated. Luo Nan gradually broke away from the chatting atmosphere of the group. He wasn't bored. He was just watching from the side. It was quite good. It was impossible for him to completely focus on chatting with others. The experiment at hand was always in progress. There was also the ever-increasing number of mutants following the yacht. They kept on expanding without end. In the end, they were still playing with fire. Meng Chong maintained a high level of vigilance from beginning to end. He paid attention to the roaring waves and the indistinct shadows of fierce figures. The mutants were all carnivores. In the surging and ceaseless biological chain of the ocean, everything was carried out in motion. Eating, resting, and even reproducing didn't conflict with temporarily following the yacht. If they were in the mood and were sick of eating meat, it wasn't impossible for them to flip this large toy on the surface of the ocean and pick and choose to eat some snacks. Moreover, there were too many tyrannical creatures gathered in a relatively small area. This in itself was harmful to their mental state. It was normal for their mood to continue to be irritable. Boss Luo, you're distracted again. What are you looking at? Luo Nan had forgotten that he was the focus of everyone's attention right now. This was especially true when he was still in video chat mode. A slight deviation of his attention would be exposed to everyone's eyes. There's a beauty next to him. Ying is giving out a lot of benefits right now. Boss, you're hurting people's feelings like this. Bamboo Pole was always the type to talk about things like this. Get lost. Zhang Yingying turned the camera away in annoyance. She didn't let her overly cool outfit appear in front of others, but she didn't forget the current situation the yacht was facing. She followed Luo Nan's line of sight and turned the camera to the roaring and undulating sea. Right now, the density of marine life surrounding the yacht was so dense that even the gale and waves couldn't hide it. They could casually see scales, sharp fins, and other things that were completely different from the color of the sea. They came and went between the waves and bubbles. There were even streams of blood that were wrapped in the wind and waves as they slapped against the yacht. Fuck. Octopus subconsciously swiped a stupefied dog emoji. The honest guy is furious. Brother Papercut, your curse has come true. Should I take it back? Papercut really did take it a bit seriously. Zhang Yingying's choice of camera had a very strong visual impact. It felt like the lead gray waves of the ocean were a dense mass. It was hard to tell whether the waves were crashing against the yacht, or these sinister marine life forms were carrying the yacht and flying on the surface of the sea. It wasn't just them. Zhang Yingying, who had already been mentally prepared, was shocked. How long has it been? How come there are so many now? Chapter 992. This doesn't seem like Tide Rush. It's too purposeful. It seems like there really is something attracting them, triggering their greed and restless emotions. Though Meng Chong had a physical body, the Blood Flame Order was a professional among professionals when it came to sensing and utilizing the extreme emotions of living creatures. Their words held great authority. Of course, in Meng Chong's mind, the greatest authority was right by his side. His gaze naturally turned to Luo Nan. Zhang Yingying saw this and suddenly came to a realization. Luo Nan, what the hell are you doing now? Luo Nan spread his hands. He didn't say anything, but he suddenly tilted his head. Do you guys hear something? Don't change the subject. Do you have ears? Oh, I was wrong. It's an oscillating psychic wave. It seems to be a cry for help. A cry for help? Who? Is there a ship in distress nearby? Zhang Yingying really did communicate with the cockpit as she spoke. She turned around and spread her hands at Luo Nan. I already said it's a psychic wave. It's not an electric wave. How far can a psychic wave travel? Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. Zhang Yingying had no way of refuting a master of mental senses who had redefined the structure of the mental domain. She didn't want to pester endlessly, so she could only discuss the matter as it stood. Which location? There are only so many people in the inner world. Maybe they know each other. I'll help them if I can. Luo Nan pointed at the deck. A ship? An ocean yacht murder case? The guys in the group never expected something like this to happen. Their excitement rose to their heads, and their imaginations couldn't be shut. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but roll her eyes. Hey, in order to go out to sea with Yuan Luo, we set out in light gear. There are only a few people on the yacht. Other than the front deck, they're in the cockpit. When we get back, we even have to fish and cook dinner on the spot. Murder. Murder my ass. Bamboo pole was more reliable. You mean under the ship, in the ocean? Cat Eyes, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, maybe they're already in the belly of a big fish. Needless to say, it wasn't impossible. Not to mention the undulating sea surface that had a height difference of over 10 meters, even if the surrounding sea was densely packed with marine life, only 10 to 20% of them were mutants. It would be a fatal danger if one were to fall inside. Zhang Yingying knew her own limits. Just by looking at the situation, she knew that if she fell down, she could only scream for help. She saw that Luo Nan's mind was a bit erratic. Perhaps he was still trying to capture the exact source of the psychic wave, but she was not surprised. She turned her gaze to look at Meng Chong. Lao Meng? Zhang Yingying's deliberate closeness wasn't the main point. The main point was her intimate relationship with Luo Nan. So, Meng Chong bowed slightly and was very polite. The qi dynamic in the sea is chaotic, and extreme emotions are mixed together. I can't control the details better than you, so I really didn't sense it. However, if there really was such a spiritual wave, being able to keep up with the high-speed cruise ship and transmit it in such a noisy environment, it must have a certain level of strength and should also have an outstanding disguise method. If that's the case, I could have just taken advantage of the chaos to escape. Yet, I ended up in a situation where I had to ask for help. It's either that I ran out of energy and couldn't maintain my disguise for a long time, or that I've been locked onto by someone stronger. If it's the former, the other party should do their best to approach the yacht and attract our attention. If it's the latter, I can basically confirm that this is a conflict on the B rank level. There are a few B rank mutants in the surroundings, but there aren't many. There are even fewer areas of conflict. Meng Chong's way of thinking was quite rigorous, but there were still a few B rank mutants. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes again. But in this large ecosystem of the sea, Meng Chong's description was completely correct. This was especially true around T-City, the most important hunting ground for marine mutants in the world. So, was there a conclusion? Zhang Yingying looked at Luo Nan once more, but Luo Nan still didn't speak. Not only that, but his gaze was oddly cast towards the sky. It really was confusing. On the contrary, Meng Chong hesitated for a few seconds before his gaze turned to a certain location on the starboard side of the front deck. Zhang Yingying was very quick-witted. Her gaze and the camera followed at the same time. She showed great mercy and gave her friends in Xia City a live broadcast. The timing was just right. Only a second or two passed before a dark green shadow suddenly appeared on the side of the ship. It leaped out at a speed far exceeding that of most marine life forms. Under the dusky sky and sea, its body seemed to have been smeared with a layer of fluorescent substance. It was extremely conspicuous. However, everyone could more or less see that this was a natural radiation phenomenon when its spiritual power was fully unleashed. It clearly couldn't hide any longer and fled with all its might. What was that? The fluorescent light reflected a silhouette. It was malevolent and ugly to the point of stupefaction. It was like an extremely large spider covered in muscles. It stuck close to the surface of the sea and floated past with a whooshing sound. A water spider? Speaking of which, I saw a bull's head. Was it an illusion? With the current transmission speed of the satellite network, a relatively smooth image could still be seen. But once it entered the high-speed range, it would be so blurry that even one's own mother wouldn't be able to recognize it. Before the group of people in the group could struggle out of the low-quality image, a long gray shadow leaped out. The surging water around its body was like a high-speed water blade. It hummed and hissed, beheading countless shoals of fish in its path. A few muffled sounds of metal rubbing against metal could be heard in the middle. "Ah, my boat!" Zhang Yingying's cry of surprise was only a foil. Most people's attention was still on the chase. The muscular spider in front looked huge, but its lightness was incredible. It moved on the undulating waves of the sea as if it was walking on flat ground. It was extremely agile, as if it could fly at any time. As for the one chasing behind, it looked like a conger eel or a sea snake. It looked fierce and violent, like a long spear or a giant axe. With a single movement, it could cut apart all living things in its path. It had an extremely strong explosive power and was definitely faster than the former. It was just that its agility was slightly inferior, which was why the muscular spider in front of it had repeatedly escaped. Perhaps that was why the muscular spider did not dare to go too far. It used the yacht as cover and circled on the surface of the sea. It really is a B-class. Zhang Yingying was a little jealous. Generally speaking, the B-class spiritual side was easier to distinguish. It was based on whether one's consciousness could penetrate into the abyss and interfere with it. The standard for physical side was a little more vague, but turning nothingness into reality was definitely a hard bar. To be able to borrow power from relatively insubstantial objects such as seawater and the atmosphere, even with the addition of the racial ability, it was not too far off. After watching for a long time, everyone had absorbed enough images and began to distinguish some things. F***CK, a battleship slicing blade. Which one? The one behind? Obviously. Bamboo Pole was still at the level of an intelligence expert. In a few seconds, he had sent the information and relevant images to the group. Be careful, this kind of mutated blade eel is also a stubborn child. Its entire body is harder than gold and iron. Cutting the hull of a ship at high speed and causing a shipwreck is a common occurrence. Moreover, it is used to non-hunting killing, so there is no reason for it to slash people. If you could send this 10 seconds earlier, I would be very grateful to you. Zhang Yingying blew hard on her forehead to dispel the annoyance in her heart. The problem was that the hair in front of her forehead was already wet and could not be blown up. It was even more annoying to have it lying on her forehead. The starboard hull is damaged. There is no leakage right now, but it will be hard to say in a few minutes. Also, what is that deformed thing in front of us? Right now, everyone knew that it was not a spider and that the bull head was not an illusion. That fellow really did grow half a bull's body. Its muscles were knotted, and its head had a short horn, a long face, a thick nose, and a large mouth. It was indeed an enormous bull head. However, the area where the bull body and the spider body were connected swelled and deformed. It began to rapidly transform into the image of a spider, and the dark green fluorescence it emitted came from this area. 8 hairy claws extended out from the area where the body was connected. The tips of the claws were faintly discernible, looking extremely tough and sharp. Zhang Yingying frowned as she evaluated. This body structure is a bit like a human-faced arachnid. If that thing had a body, could it be called a cow-faced arachnid? This is a bull demon, the traditional demon form of Ban City. The one who responded to her was actually Luo Nan, who was destined to have no fate with Erudite. Zhang Yingying was truly shocked. How did you know? You've seen it in Ban City? You could say that. Luo Nan had indeed seen a portion of the roughly processed bull demon skeleton before. The processing factory of the Great Zay Order was most proficient in processing this kind of mutant material. The perfect skeleton that Luo Nan's main body needed to display its greatest combat strength was made from this material. You really are different now that you have experience. It was hard to tell whether Zhang Yingying's words were praise or sarcasm. Oh right. Didn't you just say that someone was crying for help? How come a bull demon popped out in the end? Where's the person? Luo Nan raised his chin and once again stamped the scene of the chase, which had already circled to the rear half of the yacht. Actually, there was no need for confirmation. Many people, including Zhang Yingying, had already reacted. You're joking, right? That muscular spider, bull demon? Yeah, it's the one crying for help. It's been crying for help all this time. It seems to have recognized Her Majesty Empress Wu. You guys sense it carefully, you're getting more and more bizarre the more you talk. Zhang Yingying looked at Meng Chong. Meng Chong smiled wryly and shook his head. The mental domain is too chaotic. I'm not good at this. Luo Nan felt that the situation was very clear. This bull demon is very smart. It has some ability to communicate with people. It discovered that it was being chased and that its chances of escaping were slim. It simply fired psychic waves to tangle with us. Let's hope that Her Majesty Empress Wu can save its life. The chain of logic is quite complete. Zhang Yingying could only give this evaluation. It must be said that the level of intelligence of high-level mutants had always been the focus of research in the wilderness. Ever since the era of mutants, there were hundreds of cases of mutants and humans realizing the communication of consciousness. Be it true or false, these cases occurred every year. Zhang Yingying would not easily refute or deny a person of authority like Luo Nan. She just wanted to figure things out. You're saying that it went looking for the boss, and then you monitored it? Something like that. The boss didn't respond to it? Not at the moment. It should be. Indeed. Zhang Yingying looked at the exhausted appearance of the bull demon. If Her Majesty Empress Wu allowed it, then it wouldn't be like this. The boss didn't respond to it. Could it be that he thinks it's too ugly? He probably doesn't want to get involved in trouble. Zhang Yingying pursed her lips. I feel that letting it go would be a big problem. If we let that battleship slicing blade make a few more rounds, then it'll be our turn to send a distress signal. How far away is T-City? It's the standard way to throw our face into the Pacific Ocean. Luo Nan grunted. That proves that Her Majesty Empress Wu feels that interfering would be a big problem. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.